My wife cheated on me with her boss, but I moved on to happiness while she lost it all. Yes, my wife cheated on me, and indeed she left me for another man. Initially, I was consumed by rage and wished to damage both of them, however, that never materialized. Nevertheless, I acknowledge this might appear as a revenge story, though that was never my intention. I'm Randy Clipson, just an ordinary guy. I'm not a handsome figure, and a significant portion of my life was marked by excess weight. A shift occurred in high school due to my involvement in football, earning me the nickname Chipper. They used to say that if I chipped someone, they were going down. At 6 feet 3 inches in height and weighing 260 lbs, playing football was somewhat expected. While not excelling as an athlete, I possessed substantial upper body strength even in high school, enabling me to push defensive linemen backward. Football proved instrumental throughout my 4 school years, aiding in shedding the excess fat I had carried for most of my life. Despite retaining a bit of a belly, the accumulated muscle more than compensated. Nonetheless, having been overweight for most of my life, the self-perception as a fatty lingered. Coupled with this mindset, I was painfully shy due to constant weight-related teasing during grade and middle school. In high school, being a football player shielded me from such mockery, and it came with certain privileges, no longer making me an outcast among the girls. Despite not attracting cheerleaders, some girls were willing to go out with me. Nonetheless, I didn't engage in much dating until my senior year when I crossed paths with Cindy. Cindy Crawley transferred to our school in the latter part of my junior year, but she caught my attention only in senior year. Despite possessing the most beautiful face I had ever seen, Cindy carried at least 30 to 40 pounds of extra weight. This deterred most boys in my class, and I regret to admit that I initially shared that lack of interest. Our connection deepened when we became chemistry partners. While the subject was complicated for me, Cindy excelled and provided significant assistance. I owe her for my success in chemistry, which likely paved the way for my college journey. During our partnership, I discovered Cindy's friendly and humorous nature, along with the shared background of starting school late. Cindy had overcome a congenital heart defect, and I was held back a year by my parents, making both of us 19. Summoning all my courage, I decided to ask her out, understanding her initial suspicion given her challenging past. Despite her reluctance, she agreed to go out with me. Our first date, a simple outing to the movies followed by an ice cream soda, was enjoyable. However, my shyness prevented me from attempting to kiss her. Instead, I shook her hand and asked if I could call her, and her thrilled reaction led to several subsequent dates over the next few weeks. By the third date, I summoned the courage to give Cindy a kiss on the cheek, progressing to necking and reaching first base. The more I encountered Cindy, the more my affection for her deepened. While my developing romance was progressing, the football season took an unexpected turn. Cavern High, my high school, wasn't renowned for football prowess, but this season brought a surprising alignment of stars. Kirk Simmons, our standout quarterback, led the team with the Bailey twins, Todd and Jason, serving as our running backs. Now positioned as the left tackle, I successfully shielded Kirk's blindside, ensuring he remained unscathed. Despite losing our initial game to Mohawk High with a score of 21-7, a perennial football powerhouse, we rebounded with 7 consecutive wins, progressing to the regionals. Although we reached the state finals and suffered a 28-4 defeat from Towson High, there was a positive note, triumphing over Mohawk High in the semifinals with a satisfying 38-7 victory. My apologies for the occasional indulgence in reminiscing about the glory days of high school football. Meanwhile, my relationship with Cindy continued evolving to the next level. As prom season approached, I promptly invited Cindy to be my date. Her joyful acceptance was sealed with a big, affectionate kiss. Over the 4 weeks leading up to the prom, Cindy underwent a crash diet, shedding about 20 lbs to fit into the prom dress she had acquired. When I picked her up for the prom, my eyes nearly popped out of their sockets. Despite being what most guys might consider on the heavier side, I found her stunning. Cindy always had a generous bust, but it became more pronounced in that light blue prom dress. The dress struggled to contain her chest, which threatened to spill over. The entire evening was a dream as we danced together. As the night concluded, I suggested going parking, but Cindy had different plans, directing me to a wooded area about 30 miles outside of town. Cindy explained that her uncle had a small cabin he used for hunting. The cabin was indeed small, featuring only a tiny kitchen, a couch in front of a television, a bed, and a bathroom. We started on the sofa with our usual playfulness, concluding the night on a high note. Despite our extracurricular activities, I got Cindy back home 15 minutes before her 2 a.m. curfew. Cindy and I remained close throughout the rest of high school, engaging in a physical relationship while being cautious with protection. Following graduation, I received a partial football scholarship at a Division II school 2 states away, while Cindy opted for a local community college. My major was computer science, and hers was psychology. Since I was heading off to school, we discussed what to do about our relationship. By mutual agreement, we decided to break up, feeling it wouldn't be fair to hold each other back. It was the toughest decision I had ever made. I can't even explain how awful I felt going off to school and leaving Cindy behind. She told me that if we were meant to be together, it would happen. I was terrified of losing her and hurting so badly. Upon my arrival at Mountain Ridge University, the thought of heading straight home crossed my mind, but I couldn't go back on my commitment. I had pledged to honor my commitment to the university, and my strong desire for a college education fueled my determination. The only solution I could think of was immersing myself in football practices and schoolwork from morning till night. I dedicated myself to keeping my mind occupied, despite the coach's advice against it. My coaches and teachers were impressed by my work ethic. Taking a full load of classes and being a college football player meant shedding fat and building muscle through intensive weight training, resulting in both upper and lower body strength. With only a partial scholarship, my parents covered the remaining balance, even though I knew they struggled with the cost. Playing football left me with no means to contribute financially. While I lacked funds to come home, I made a weekly call to Cindy, who appeared as devastated by our split as I was. My first college year concluded successfully, excelling in both football and academics. By the third game of the season, I earned a spot in the starting lineup, shifting to play left guard due to my slower speed. My increased strength proved beneficial, contributing to our 8-2 season record. Academically, I ended the year on the dean's list, much to my parents' delight. During the summer, Cindy and I resumed our relationship. I found myself deeply in love with her, or so I believed at the time. Reflecting on it, I've questioned whether it was love or just lust. After careful consideration, I lean towards love, as a small part of me still holds affection for her. I worked and took 3 online courses during the summer, determined to finish college as soon as possible. Cindy and I also resumed our bed activities, exploring each other's bodies whenever possible. I completed college in 3 years and married Cindy right after graduation. Both employed by the multinational software and electronics company Tri-Orbit Electronics in Virginia, we worked in software development and human resources, respectively. After saving enough money, we purchased a small house and began discussing starting a family. The first 3.5 years of our marriage were wonderful. Except for one aspect, we both gained a significant amount of weight. Cindy reached 230 lbs, and I weighed in at 310 lbs. I carried the extra weight better due to my height, but neither of us was content with the excess pounds. Despite unsuccessful attempts at dieting, my love for Cindy remained unwavering, regardless of her size. After 3 years of marriage with no kids, we consulted our family doctor. Following a series of tests, he found nothing wrong with either of us but suggested weight loss might aid Cindy's conception. So, for the first time in our lives, we embarked on a strict diet. 6 months later, Cindy was down 50 lbs, while I was only down about 25, but I must admit that I cheated more than I should have. Cindy's weight loss was noticeable, attracting attention from men. Alongside the diet, Cindy began going to the gym 5 days a week. Observing her transformation, I realized I had to step up my efforts. I strictly adhered to our diet and started hitting the gym with her. By the end of 1 year of dieting, Cindy had shed 80 lbs, and I had lost 90. While we both felt really good about ourselves, sadly, our weight loss was going to bring me a broken heart. As Cindy continued to lose weight, she started dressing in more revealing clothing. Initially enjoyable, I became displeased when I overheard some comments at work. However, I couldn't say anything because for her whole life, Cindy had been an ugly duckling. Now she had turned into a beautiful swan. The real problem for me arose when Kirk Simmons was appointed head of human resources. He was now a senior director of the company. I was just a senior programmer, and he was now 2 levels above me, becoming Cindy's boss. Initially, I didn't think much of it. Kirk was married to Susie Looper, who had been a cheerleader in high school. I had seen her at company functions, and she was still quite attractive. Hardly noticing her, I ended up dancing with her at my wife's request as she danced with her boss during a Christmas party. I danced a few times with Susie, while Kirk partnered with Cindy, dancing just beside her. I found myself becoming noticeably excited. It wasn't a big deal, though, as, still being in my 22nd, any pretty girl could elicit the same response. One surprising aspect was that she wasn't a stuck-up snob, which pleased me. Upon Kirk and I arriving, "I didn't recognize you or Cindy," Susie complimented us, expressing that we looked fabulous. My perception of Cindy's beauty had always been high, but now she was truly stunning. I mentioned, somewhat embarrassed, that someone should keep an eye on her. The response was a simple, "Thank you." I expressed gratitude for Susie's kindness, and she blushed in response. The music concluded, and around 5 months before our 4th anniversary, Cindy revealed a significant decision. She informed me of her choice to resume taking birth control pills. I raised objections, inquiring about our plans for having children. She straightforwardly mentioned that she had decided not to have any at the moment. My anger surfaced as I probed into her abrupt decision. She reassured me, stroking my arm, stating, "Look, we can have kids. I just don't want to get fat again. I want to enjoy being slim for a while." In hindsight, I should have recognized the problem at that moment, but I was clueless, having complete trust in Cindy. Unfortunately, my trust in Kirk was misplaced, as I could trust him as far as I could throw a bus. Unbeknownst to me, Kirk had put on a full-court press to get Cindy. She, of course, was flattered beyond belief that the former football captain of our high school team was pursuing her. I first became concerned when Cindy began working late and then going, supposedly, out with girlfriends. I was genuinely clueless about these things, but I'm not stupid. When Cindy started coming in later and later, I became suspicious. I didn't want to believe that she was cheating on me, but I couldn't ignore the signs. I hired a PI company, and within a week, they had all the evidence I needed. They had a video of Cindy and Kirk engaging in a lovemaking act in the office. How they obtained that, I have no idea. They had pictures of them being affectionate at dinner. Videos showed Kirk coming to my house while I was at work. Lastly, there were pictures of them engaging in a lovemaking act on our living room floor. I knew they took those through the front window of our house. Remember when I said that I couldn't really describe what it was like having closeness with Cindy the first time? Well, I have no words to explain the pain that I felt finding out that my wife was cheating on me. Not only that, but she was cheating with someone who had been a friend of mine. Granted, Kirk and I were not close, but I had still considered him a friend. It hurt unbelievably. I still held out hope that once I confronted Cindy, she would come to her senses. I was in love with her, and I thought she was still in love with me. I took the evidence home that night, and after dinner I told Cindy we needed to talk. She looked at me curiously, but sat at the kitchen table to listen. Cindy immediately turned white and then buried her face in her hands. She started to cry and ran to the bathroom. I went and knocked on the door, but she refused to open it. I waited in the kitchen with a glass of rum. Finally, she came out and sat down at the kitchen table with her head down. I spoke coldly, asking what the other person had to say. She mentioned that she didn't intend for it to happen, speaking in a voice just above a whisper. Cindy reacted, expressing disapproval and stating that there was no need for crudeness. She implied that if I had paid more attention to her, the situation might have been avoided. Initially taken aback, I briefly considered whether I had neglected her. However, my anger resurfaced, and I asserted that she shouldn't try to shift the blame. I maintained my innocence and confronted her about the affair, asking for her explanation. She looked nervously at me but remained silent. I pressed further, inquiring about our next steps. Struggling to control my anger, I questioned whether she wanted to be with Kirk or with me. Despite expressing love for me, she tearfully admitted to also loving Kirk. I conveyed that a decision needed to be made, almost biting my tongue. I set a deadline, insisting on knowing her choice by the next day. If she chose to stay with me, she would have to sever ties with Kirk, resign from her job, and commit to attending counseling. Cindy acknowledged this. Later, I retrieved all her belongings, placing them in the hall, and informed her that she could sleep in the guest room until she made up her mind. The next day, I returned home early from work. The truth was that I couldn't concentrate and was less than useless. My stomach had been doing flip-flops all day. At one point during the morning, I thought I was going to lose what little breakfast I had eaten. About 6 o'clock, Cindy came in with a very nervous look on her face. I was sitting at the kitchen table, as I had the previous night. She took a seat across from me, and I demanded to know if she had made up her mind. Tears started to flow down her cheek as she expressed her love for me, but admitted an inability to give up Kirk, stating that she loved him too. I sighed deeply, attempting to conceal the fact that my heart was breaking. Acknowledging her choice, she simply nodded, causing a pain deeper than if someone had stabbed me. My brain was about to explode. I was going back and forth at 1,000,000 miles an hour between eliminating them both and curling up in the corner and crying my eyes out. I sarcastically remarked that she had chosen quite the winner. Bringing up Kirk and Susie's new baby boy, I questioned whether it bothered her to leave the child without a father. A hint of anger and shame crossed Cindy's face as she mentioned that Kirk had planned to divorce Susie before their involvement. Continuing, I asked if she was willing to discard almost 4 years of marriage just like that. Struggling to contain both my temper and tears, I sought an understanding of her decision. To be truthful, right then, I was seriously considering smacking Cindy to a pulp and then going to look for Kirk to break his neck. She softly expressed regret for any hurt caused, her voice tender. She clarified that she hadn't intended for it to happen, but had fallen deeply in love with Kirk, and he felt the same way. Despite feeling an intense urge to damage her at that moment, I recognized the importance of maintaining control. It required all my self-control, but I eventually succeeded. Deep within the logical part of my brain, I recognized that resorting to physical violence would yield nothing. I refrained from revealing the depth of my hurt and refused to beg her to stay, considering it the worst thing a cheated-on husband could do, a sign of total weakness. I plainly stated that if the other person desired a divorce, they would have it. Confusion filled her eyes, and perhaps I imagined it, a hint of hurt. She might have expected me to fight to keep her, but I knew that if she had decided to leave, there was nothing I could do or say to stop her. Cindy was taken aback by my behavior but rose and started packing her belongings. The following day, I visited the bank and our financial advisor, explaining the situation and withdrawing half the funds from each account. I then established separate accounts in my name only, canceled all our credit cards, and applied for new ones solely in my name. I listed our house for sale through a realtor friend and finally consulted a divorce lawyer. With a heart full of hatred, I ensured Cindy was served at work, citing infidelity as the cause. The divorce proceedings were relatively straightforward. With only about 4 years of marriage and no children, there was nothing to dispute. We split everything evenly and went our separate ways. Kirk's divorce was messier. Dealing with a child under a year old and Susie having never worked, he faced child support and alimony. One aspect of Kirk's divorce that admittedly brought me some satisfaction was his decision to cut costs on his lawyer. Instead of limiting spousal maintenance to a year or two, it was set at 15 years. Kirk wasn't pleased, but he signed the papers. 2 months after the divorces were finalized, Kirk and Cindy got married. It was a bitter pill to swallow. The initial week post-breakup left me utterly lost. Not being much of a drinker, that held no appeal. For weeks, revenge consumed my thoughts. I'm sure every guy who's been cheated on can relate. I even began searching the internet for information on how ex-husbands sought revenge on their former wives and lovers. I found myself in a dark place, even purchasing a weapon. Then, as I read story after story about guys getting revenge, a shift occurred in my perspective. Initially, my thoughts of revenge were centered on violence. Subsequently, I considered damaging their property, contemplating ideas like flattening all their tires, putting sugar in their gas tanks, flooding their new house, and various other impractical schemes. As I read more revenge stories, I recognized the absurdity in most of them, realizing no feasible way to achieve the revenge I desired. Eventually, I sought counseling at my church. The pastor spent almost 2 hours explaining that seeking revenge wouldn't alleviate the hurt from my wife's betrayal. Regardless of how much pain I inflicted on my former wife or her new husband, the emotional anguish would persist. The pastor's advice, though seemingly simple for someone with my kind of pain, emphasized that only time and distance would heal my heart. Despite my initial skepticism, I acknowledged that being near Cindy without the possibility of being with her would continually reopen the emotional wound. I also accepted the pastor's truth about revenge. It wouldn't alleviate the hurt. Consequently, I followed his counsel, necessitating the establishment of distance between Cindy and me. An opportunity arose when I heard rumors that the company was in trouble. Apparently, the firm had entered into a contract with the Defense Department. The deal promised significant profits, but there was a downside. Our firm was charged with developing an entirely new software and electronics package for the Air Force's fighters and bombers. It's entirely classified, so I can't provide details. Suffice it to say, it aimed to position the United States ahead of Russia and China, contingent on my company's successful delivery. The rumor circulating was that the project was significantly behind and over budget, making it different from typical government contracts. While substantial profits were at stake, the company faced great risk. Unlike other government projects, there would be no progress payments during the development of this software and its accompanying electronic components. Tremendous penalties loomed for late delivery, and the company could possibly go under if the project didn't meet the contract requirements. As one of the senior software designers, I was called in to consult on the impending disaster. Most other designers were hesitant to get involved, updating their resumes and considering leaving the company. Taking on the project meant risking termination and potential company collapse. The stigma of failure would linger for a long time. However, considering my modest needs post-divorce, the prospect of losing my job seemed manageable. Learning that Cindy was pregnant added emotional weight, as I had always envisioned starting a family with her. Evaluating the project data provided, it became clear that the chosen direction wouldn't work. Despite the risks, I agreed to take on the assignment and headed for California, putting about 3,000 miles between my ex-wife and me. Reminiscent of my first year in college, I delved into my work, enduring long days sometimes spanning 20 hours, leaving little time to contemplate Cindy. I terminated 3/4 seconds of the programmers and all engineers handling electronic components, bringing in fresh talent. Despite the looming 11-month deadline, I scrapped their progress, relying on the creativity of engineers I brought on board, including some poached from rival companies. Their skepticism turned to astonishment when I explained what I wanted them to build and why I envisioned the electronic components in that particular way. Yet the challenge shifted to making the software functional. Gradually, we crafted a program that instilled confidence in me. It wasn't until 3 weeks before delivering our product to the military that I was certain of our success. The initial test merging the software and electronic components displayed a 96% success rate. Scanning the 4% that hadn't worked, I identified easy fixes. The revelation of our program's success triggered a surge in company stocks by over 300 points within a couple of months. Subsequently, the Defense Department announced the expansion of our contract to include the Navy, Army, and Marines, forecasting billions in profits. The success didn't halt there. I recognized the potential to tweak the program for various commercial applications. Essentially, we removed all classified information, creating an outstanding platform for practical uses. The array of things adaptable to this program seemed boundless. Following this triumph, I earned a promotion to Senior Vice President, tasked with developing these commercial applications. In the years that followed, frequent returns to the Virginia home office never led to encounters with Kirk or Cindy. Despite not anticipating any impact on me, I desired no contact, having nothing to convey to either of them. The pastor's counsel about putting time and distance between heartbreak had proven 100% accurate. I had moved on. During one visit, I unexpectedly met Kelly Bailey, a former cheerleader from Cavern High and Susie's best friend. Aware of her marriage to Jason Bailey and having a son before I met Cindy, I always harbored a crush on Kelly, the prettiest cheerleader. Kelly's warm demeanor in high school made her impossible not to like. Although she had aged somewhat, she remained physically attractive. In contrast to Cindy's short blonde hair and ample figure, Kelly, standing barely 5 feet 3 inches tall, had long black hair and a proportionally smaller chest. A shared warmth in their smiles was the commonality. Stunned that she recognized me in a grocery store, preparing for a board presentation, we exchanged smiles. Despite a few gray hairs and small wrinkles, I still had a slight crush. Kelly called out to me as I pondered over frozen dinners. Upon recognizing her voice, I blushed slightly. She then stopped her basket next to mine, and I greeted her with a smile, expressing my flattery at her recognition. She confessed that she wouldn't have recognized me if Susie hadn't pointed me out during lunch at Tri-Orbit. I was genuinely surprised when she mentioned that. She then smiled and confirmed that she had been working at Tri-Orbit for about 6 years, specifically in the marketing department. It surprised me to learn that Kelly worked at the same company as me. I felt a twinge of guilt for not knowing that, however, since I had little involvement with marketing, I shouldn't have felt bad. Still, I felt like I should have been aware. "How are you doing?" I eventually asked to ease my discomfort. "I'm doing as well as can be expected," she replied, a hint of sadness in her voice. "I'm divorced now. Jason has turned out to be a real idiot. Not only was he cheating with his secretary, but also with half a dozen other women. He even got one of them pregnant. I divorced him, of course. He got off pretty lightly considering what he was doing. There was no alimony because our salaries are about the same. We didn't own a house and had very little savings. All he was ordered to do was pay child support. Still, I have to hassle him for it every month. I don't mind bugging him to get the money, but he totally ignores our son, Scott. I get furious when I think about it," she said. I apologized to Kelly, expressing regret over Jason's behavior. I admitted that although I was aware he had a wild side, I had hoped he would calm down after marriage. Pausing for a moment, I looked into Kelly's emerald green eyes, feeling unsure of what to say next. Eventually, I mentioned that my wife and I were divorced, with Cindy choosing to pursue. "Todd? No, Randy?" Kelly shook her head. "It was Kirk who pursued Cindy. Susie told me all about it." "I suppose I can't argue with that," I admitted, "but it takes two to tango." "You're not seriously thinking about eating any of these frozen dinners, are you?" she asked, eyeing my cart. "Yeah, I'm afraid so," I nodded. "I'm a terrible cook, and this is about all I can handle." "Look, if you'd like a home-cooked meal, why don't you come over to my house? It won't be fancy, but I guarantee it will be good." Initially, I hesitated, but the idea of a home-cooked meal proved too tempting to resist. I mentioned that I wouldn't mind having a real meal if it wasn't too much trouble. I couldn't recall the last time I had one. The evening turned out to be delightful. Kelly made meatloaf with mashed potatoes, string beans, and sherbet for dessert. It was enjoyable having someone to converse with. Scotty, as his mother called him, was a very outgoing and friendly kid. I discovered that he was a Tampa Bay Buccaneers fan like me. We had a great time discussing the team and their prospects for the upcoming season. I was a die-hard fan and also a season ticket holder. In fact, I had 4 season tickets on the 50-yard line. The company covered them because I would take potential clients to the games. When I didn't have any clients, I'd invite my buddies, and if I couldn't find anyone to go with me, I'd go alone. I'd give away the other 3 tickets, usually to people trying to buy from a scalper. Scotty expressed a wish to attend a game someday, sounding wistful. In response, I impulsively offered to make it happen. Once the words left my mouth, I realized I had overstepped and swiftly attempted to rectify it. That is, of course, if your mother approves. Scotty turned to his mother with imploring eyes. All she said is, "We'll discuss it." At the end of the evening, I apologized. "I'm sorry about the Tampa Bay Buccaneers offer. It slipped out before I realized. But just so you know, I have 4 season tickets to all the Bucs home games and a ton of frequent flyer miles. If you wouldn't mind him attending a game with me, I'd be thrilled to take him." She stood there with piercing eyes, and I realized that I had made another mistake. Quickly, I attempted to rectify it, but only ended up making another blunder. After a brief pause, I stuttered out that the invitation also extended to her. I suggested securing separate rooms, with one for Kelly and Scotty and another for myself. Despite feeling embarrassed, Kelly simply smiled and called me the sweetest man. While chuckling, she remarked that my expression was priceless. Feeling relieved, I sighed as I truly didn't want to offend her. I enjoyed her company and hoped we could meet up from time to time. Deciding to push ahead, I said, "Would you mind if I asked you out when I come to town? If you're with someone, I'll understand. I just really enjoyed having someone to talk to." Kelly studied me for a moment, then smiled. "Randy, I've known you since high school. I always thought you were cute and one of the nicest guys, but never considered dating you because I had Jason. Now that I've gotten to know you a little, yes, I'd be pleased if you called me, and I'd love to go see the Tampa Bay Buccaneers with you and Scotty." Over the following year, I'd call Kelly every time I returned to Virginia, and we'd get together several times. I booked trips back east when I really didn't have to be there. It wasn't a love affair at first. We were just good friends who enjoyed spending time together. I took Kelly and Scotty to the final game of the season that year. The Bucs needed to win to make it into the playoffs, and they did. Scotty was beside himself with joy over the win. That night, after Scotty went to bed, Kelly came over to my room, and we became more than just good friends. When Kelly knocked on my door unexpectedly, I was engrossed in watching a local sports station analyze the Bucs game. Concerned, I asked if everything was all right, particularly about Scotty's well-being. Kelly reassured me with a smile that nothing was wrong and that Scotty was sleeping peacefully. Excited about the playoffs, she expressed a desire to have a drink and talk. Feeling a bit underdressed in my boxer shorts and t-shirt, I mentioned that I needed to put on some pants before inviting her in. However, upon searching for my trousers, I realized they weren't where I thought I had left them. Kelly said there was no need for pants as she pushed the door open and entered the room hurriedly. As I continued searching for my pants without success, Kelly giggled at the situation, causing my face to flush red with embarrassment. She then suggested putting us on an even playing field if I felt uncomfortable and proceeded to remove her skirt, leaving us both in our underwear. With a smile, she asked me to mix her a drink and join her for a conversation. I went to the minibar, retrieving 2 small bottles of rum and 2 cans of Coke. As I mixed the drinks, Kelly climbed onto my bed and sat cross-legged, her white-laced underwear catching my attention. After handing Kelly her drink, I looked around the room for a place to sit. Sensing my hesitation, Kelly gestured toward the bed and invited me to sit beside her, reassuring me that she wouldn't bite. Despite still feeling embarrassed and red-faced, I nodded and took a seat next to her. A big swallow of my drink helped me relax as the rum coursed through my body. We talked for a while, and when we finished our drinks, I took her cup and asked if she wanted another. She shook her head, and I waited for her to get up. I figured she'd head back to her son. I was totally wrong about that. Not sure what to do, I put the cups in the wastebasket and sat down again. When I did, Kelly kissed me on the lips. It was quick and soft, sending an electrical charge through my body. She saw my surprise and smiled. "I've been waiting for months for you to kiss me. I figured that you still thought of me as that high school cheerleader who was unattainable. Let me assure you that I am not that person anymore." Kelly had read me like a book. There had been so many times that I wanted to kiss her but was afraid. I didn't want to take a chance of losing her as a friend. I leaned forward and kissed her. We kissed a long time, with our tongues exploring every part of each other's mouths. She tasted so sweet. After we parted ways, I expressed admiration, mentioning that she was a beautiful and amazing woman. Kelly then laid her head on my chest. That night of passion surpassed my first time with Cindy. 6 months after that night, Kelly and I became engaged. Scotty was thrilled that I was going to be his dad. A year after that night, we were married. Jason had been as big a turd as Kelly had claimed. He barely spoke to his son, and he really resented me. Jason was still close friends with Kirk, and every time he came to Kelly's apartment when I was there, he had to tell me how happy they were and what great closeness Kirk and Cindy were having. I guess he thought it would make me jealous. I just listened and said nothing. What I did learn was that Kirk was still heading up the human resources department for the company. But Cindy had given up her job to be a full-time mom. I was a little surprised to learn that Kirk and Cindy had 3 kids now, but it no longer bothered me at all. One time, when I heard Kelly on the phone giving Jason hell for not sending the support payment, I made the mistake of telling her to forget about it. I was more than willing to pay whatever for Scotty's needs. Kelly spoke sternly, insisting that I needed to stay out of the situation. She expressed determination not to let him off the hook for child support despite his neglect of his son. I promptly withdrew my statement, acknowledging that the money in question belonged to Scotty. In December, I was set to be appointed Executive Vice President of the company. The announcement was scheduled for the Christmas party at the Washington Convention Center, with around 400 to 500 attendees. I felt a bit self-conscious about the grand recognition at this event, but Kelly was overjoyed. She scolded me for complaining, insisting that I deserved the recognition. I know almost as many people in that company as you do, and they've told me story after story about how this company wouldn't exist if it wasn't for you. They also told me that you'll be the next CEO when Mel steps down next year, she said. I responded, suggesting that it may not matter. However, she countered with a smile, mentioning that she was married to the most beautiful woman in the world and had a surprise for me. We recalled a past incident in Kansas City involving a mishap with a rubber. I acknowledged the memory with a nod, which was followed by a silly grin. She confirmed that she was pregnant now, expressing her determination to keep me close. Embracing me tightly, she expressed her desire for a night in bed if we didn't have to attend the party. I confessed that I wasn't particularly fond of parties anymore, as I had to attend so many that they had lost their appeal. Kelly, however, still seemed to enjoy them, especially when I was with her. She had a certain aura that attracted people to her. We danced for a while before running into Kirk and Cindy, who were accompanied by Jason and his date, Kathy. I was genuinely surprised to see Cindy's weight gain and Kirk's protruding belly, while Jason remained in good shape. I speculated that Jason might still be actively seeking romantic encounters. I was unsure what to do, but then someone began talking over the public address system. "Could I have your attention for just a moment?" I realized it was Mel Stanton, the CEO of Tri-Orbit. I promise I won't give a long speech. As most of you know, we've been looking to replace Charlie Bruner, our executive vice president, who retired 3 months ago. I knew who I wanted right away, but the board dithered around for 3 months. Well, after months of interviewing dozens of candidates, they finally agreed with me. I'm thrilled to announce that our new executive vice president comes from within our own organization. He has always been a tremendous asset, and now it's time he receives his just reward. I give you our next executive vice president, Randy Clipson. A spotlight was suddenly shining on me, and loud applause broke out from all around the room. Kelly pulled me to her and gave me a long, passionate kiss. When the commotion ended and the party returned to normal, I turned to where Cindy, Kirk, Jason, and his date were standing. I didn't know what to say to them. Jason seemed pissed and jealousy filled Kirk's face. However, when I glanced at Cindy, there was a look of sadness and loss. Feeling uncertain about how to proceed, I watched as Kelly took charge. She greeted Kirk, Cindy, and Jason warmly, hugging each of them in turn. Then she turned her attention to Kathy, extending a polite handshake and expressing pleasure in meeting her. I took my lead from my wife. I shook Kirk, Jason, and Kathy's hands and gave Cindy a small hug. We chatted briefly and the music began playing. In a surprising twist, Kelly suggested, "Randy, why don't you dance with Cindy and I'll dance with my ex-husband? Kathy, why don't you and Kirk share a dance as well?" I looked at Kelly with a questioning expression, but she just smiled knowingly. So I danced with Cindy. I asked about Kirk and Cindy's well-being because I couldn't think of anything else to say. Cindy responded that things weren't going particularly well and mentioned that she suspected they were headed for a divorce because she believed Kirk had been unfaithful. Expressing genuine sympathy, I told her I was sorry to hear about their situation. Cindy responded skeptically, questioning whether I truly meant my apology, as she expected me to say something along the lines of, "It serves you right." I initially expressed shock at the comment, stating that I would never say such a thing. Then I realized there had been a time when I probably would have said something similar. Well, to be truthful, when we first broke up, if you'd come to me then, I probably would have said something like that. But I couldn't hate you. You were my first love, and it hurt to lose you. But life moves on, and so have I. Shortly after that, the music stopped, and tears began to stream down Cindy's face. She expressed regret, admitting that leaving me was the biggest mistake of her life and lamenting that there was nothing she could do to rectify it. As I watched her walk away, I couldn't help but feel genuine sympathy for her. Kelly put her arm around me, prompting me to lean down and kiss her. I inquired about her dance with Jason, to which she responded with a smile, saying that he was still an idiot. He actually tried to put the moves on me. He told me that he's ready to settle down, and he'd be more than happy to take me back. I just laughed at him and told him, why? Why would I want him when I had the greatest man in the world? I watched Cindy reach their table and sit down. Even from this distance, I could see the tears. Kirk and Jason appeared to be having a heated discussion. If I had to guess, I'd say that Kirk tried to put a move on Jason's date. I thought back to the pain I had felt when Cindy left me. Something like that never truly goes away. It's like a bad cut. It leaves a scar. I also thought of all the planning for revenge that filled me during that time. The pastor had been right. No amount of revenge would have ever stopped my pain. It indeed was time and distance that had healed me. As I said at the beginning, even though I had given up on the idea of getting revenge, I had, in fact, achieved it. My revenge was exacted in the only way that is truly meaningful to someone who has been cheated on. I was living well, loved, and totally happy. My wife cheated, got pregnant, and wanted me to raise the affair baby, but I took my revenge. At 48, I sat in my office overlooking the Pacific, contemplating my company's offer. Accepting it would net me about $24 million, making me incredibly wealthy. Despite this, I felt miserable. Professionally, I was successful, but personally, my life was a mess. My name is Jerry Ford, Jerome, not Gerald like the president. I came from a blue-collar, lower-middle-class family and was a screw-up in high school because I found it boring. My guidance counselor even suggested I drop out and find a job. I was a pain in the back. Somehow I graduated high school, probably because they wanted to get rid of me. The Vietnam War was raging, and I enlisted in the Army for 3 years, eager to serve. My dad, an electrician, thought it would help me mature and learn a trade. To my surprise, I thrived in basic training. The discipline and physical demands appealed to me, and I excelled. This led to volunteering for Ranger training, a grueling 2-month program at Fort Benning, Georgia, preparing for Vietnam. I wasn't a big guy, just under 6 feet and 170 lbs, but I stayed in shape by swimming. The training honed my body and survival skills. 2 months later, I was in Vietnam, which was far from pleasant. I spent over a year and a half there until shrapnel wounded me, damaging my spine and bladder. After months in a veterans hospital, I was discharged. Fortunately, I was incontinent, and my limp is barely noticeable today. The inability to have children didn't bother me much then, but would haunt me later. At 20, out of the Army with no real skills except combat, I was back home, unsure of my next steps. My dad found a VA-sponsored counseling program at Drexel University. After a day of testing, Dr. Cypress suggested I study engineering based on my aptitudes. Despite my poor high school performance, he convinced me I could succeed in college. I enrolled at Drexel, majoring in electrical engineering, making my parents proud. Around that time, I got a call from my old buddy, Ben. "Line Jerry, it's Ben. I'm out of the Army. Ben, it's great to hear from you. How come you got out early? Where are you? How did you get my number?" I was excited to hear his voice. "I lost a leg to a mine, but the prosthesis is great, and I get around fine. I called your folks for your number. I'm in California now, studying architecture at Caltech." "I'm going to be an architect, Jerry," I laughed. Ben was probably the smartest guy in our unit. "That's fantastic, Ben. I'm really happy for you. My folks must have told you I'm studying engineering." "Yeah, I heard. Can you believe it? Us becoming professionals, you an engineer and me an architect?" We laughed and talked for another half hour, promising to keep in touch. I decided not to commute from home, and using my GI Bill, a small medical pension, and money my folks saved, I got a tiny studio apartment near school. It had a bed, some chairs, a sofa, a kitchenette, and a small bathroom, but it was enough for me. I set up a study area with a desk and a used computer and focused on my studies, knowing my future depended on it. I could walk to class and take the streetcar to visit my folks. The first 2 years flew by, and I was surprised to find I did well in my exams. I was serious about becoming an engineer, which left little time for a social life. I made some casual friends, and we occasionally went out for beer or pizza. One Friday, a classmate, Carl, invited me to a sorority party at Penn. I decided to go, and that night changed my life. I met Kimberly, who seemed like a rich girl with her stylish clothes and diamond earrings. My contempt showed, and she sensed it. Feeling guilty, I quickly got a beer. We eventually talked about marriage, and I worried about how she'd react to my sterility. One day, Kim confessed, "Jerry, I love you and want to be with you forever, but I don't want children. I wouldn't make a good mother." Tears welled up in her eyes. "I'll understand if you want to break up." I hugged her. "Kim, if you don't want children, then I don't either." My sterility was now irrelevant, and I didn't even need to mention it. Ironically, Kim was lax about taking her birth control pills, often skipping days. It never caused any problems for us, reinforcing her belief that missing a few days didn't matter. In our case, it didn't. "Jerry," Kim said one afternoon, "I think it's time for you to meet my parents. They want to meet you." I knew this was coming, but I dreaded it. I felt sick, convinced they'd see me as unworthy. The meeting was set for Sunday. I looked into Kim's family. They were high society. Bernard Van Horn owned a huge construction firm and was worth hundreds of millions. His wife, Catherine, came from old money. I felt out of place. Her dad sent a black Lincoln Town car to pick us up. I was in a foul mood, but Kim reassured me. We arrived at their large, impeccably maintained colonial house. Kim led me inside, calling out for her parents. To my surprise, they were incredibly welcoming, treating me like family. Catherine was polite, but with a hint of caution. She was about 55, blonde, blue-eyed, and youthful-looking for her age, probably mid-40, I thought. If Kim ages like this, I can live with that. Bernie insisted I call him by his first name, which felt odd given his wealth and stature. He was tall, distinguished, and very rich, but immediately took a liking to me, interested in my background and studies. As we left, he said, "Jerry, I'm impressed. Keep up your studies. I can always use a good engineer." He laughed and slapped my back, telling Kim, "You gotta keep her." On the ride back, Kim snuggled into me, relieved. I sighed, glad it was over, but now thinking about Kim meeting my folks. The contrast between her family's estate and my parents' South Philly row house would be stark, but I knew my parents would welcome her warmly. Kim's visit to my parents. Home went well. She was surprised by their modest living conditions but handled it gracefully. Occasionally I saw a look in her eyes that unsettled me, but I knew she wouldn't look down on anyone. She and my mom bonded in the kitchen over a pot roast recipe, even though I doubted Kim could cook. My dad took me outside and said, "Jerry, Kim seems great and loves you, but she's used to privilege. Engineering pays well, but maybe not enough for her expectations. Just think about it." He patted my shoulder, and we went back inside. When we were in the front parlor, my dad brought out wine glasses and made an announcement. "Jerry, Kim, a toast to your happiness. May your lives together be long and joyful. And now, we have sold the house and are moving to Florida. We bought a small villa on the West Coast, and I've got a part-time job there. Retired of the cold and moving by the end of the month. Cheers." I was stunned but happy for them, joking that they should keep the second bedroom ready for our visits. I noticed a look in Kim's eyes but ignored it. Kim suggested we combine what her parents paid for her lodging with my rent and get a real apartment together. It made sense, so we rented a nice place nearby. Kim insisted she needed a car for school, so her dad bought her a BMW. Our senior year went well. Kim was busy with her studies and wedding plans, while I focused on maintaining high grades. Despite our busyness, we spent less time together. 2 months before graduation, Kim came home with exciting news. "Jerry, I got a part-time job starting next week. If it goes well, it could become full-time after graduation." She was thrilled. She'd be a probationary assistant editor at a large publishing house in Center City. I whined a bit about our lack of time together. "Geez, Kim, we barely see each other now. It'll be worse." "I know, but this is a golden opportunity. Please be happy for me," she pleaded. I forced a smile and encouraged her. "You'll be great, honey. They'll love you." She danced around the apartment while I felt a sense of foreboding. It actually worked out. Kim worked a couple of evenings when I had late classes, so we didn't lose much time together. The semester flew by, and suddenly our wedding day arrived. The ceremony was in a ritzy hotel with over guests, but only a few were my family and friends. I felt like I was in a haze, letting events carry me through. That evening, Kim's father, Bernie, took me aside to a room off the ballroom. "Jerry, I know you have resumes out, but I want you to consider working for me. I need to bolster my technical department, and I want you to train with Donna, our head electrical engineer. This is a real job with room for advancement, and I'll pay you more than anyone else." He grinned, and I recognized this was a great opportunity. We shook hands, agreeing that Kim and I would make it on our own. And that was our contract. My parents gave us a beautiful sterling silver service for 12, which probably strained their budget. My in-laws gifted us a 10-day vacation in Jamaica. I felt awkward about them paying for our honeymoon but didn't want to refuse. I started feeling uneasy about the Van Horns' influence on our relationship. Kim and I had discussed this, and she knew I wanted us to be independent. She brushed off my concerns, but they were real to me. Our biggest disagreement was where to live after graduation and our wedding. Kim wanted to buy an apartment in a high-rise in Center City, close to her job and the Van Horn building where I would work. I insisted we rent a place we could afford and buy later when we were financially ready. Kim was furious that I wouldn't accept help from her parents. I made it clear that we had to make it on our own. She eventually agreed, though grudgingly. We found a nice 2-bedroom, 2-bath apartment near our jobs. Kim had her car, and I could take a streetcar to work. It was convenient. We went into debt for furniture, but I managed Kim's spending, and we furnished the place nicely. Bernie kept his word, and my job was demanding but rewarding. I worked closely with Don Malone, an experienced engineer who taught me a lot. I quickly realized that college was just the beginning of my learning. I often stayed late, eager to learn as much as possible. Kim was also dedicated to her job, advancing from assistant to full-fledged editor within 2 years. She earned good money, and we saved for a place of our own. Kim still wanted a luxury apartment in Center City and often criticized our current place, calling it squalid. Once her attitude strained our relationship. I stayed in touch with Ben Klein, who kept urging me to move to California, but I was content where I was and knew Kim wouldn't want to move. Ben was persistent, but I had to laugh at his efforts. One Friday evening, I had made reservations at a fancy restaurant, had 24 roses in a crystal vase, and a velvet box with diamond earrings for Kim. It was our second wedding anniversary, and I bet she thought I had forgotten since she hadn't mentioned it. The phone ringing interrupted my thoughts. "Jerry," Kim said, "I'm really sorry, but I'll be late tonight. We have a million things to do for Paul's new novel, and I'll be here for a few more hours. I'll grab something to eat and see you around 10. She hung up before I could reply. I looked at the roses on the sideboard, wondering if she even remembered it was our anniversary. Her job seemed more important. We had both been so focused on work that we neglected our marriage. It felt like we were just roommates. Kim had been consumed by the launch of Paul LLL's novel. She was excited, but I grew tired of hearing about him. I met him at a reception months ago and found him arrogant. Kim was wearing a revealing black dress that night, which made me uneasy when she introduced me to LLL. He tried to hurt me with a handshake, but I quickly put him in his place. He sneered, calling me the engineer, and laughed. Kim looked embarrassed. The rest of the evening, she stayed by his side, and he kept giving me challenging looks. A week later, Kim stopped talking about LLL and the project. When I brought him up, she changed the subject. I started feeling suspicious and paranoid, but I tried to dismiss it. Our marriage was on autopilot, and Kim was distant. We hadn't been carnal in weeks. A week before our anniversary, I decided to surprise Kim at work and take her to dinner. I went to Crown Publishing and accidentally got off on the executive floor, where I ran into James Frost, the VP. "Jerry, good to see you. It's been a while," he said, patting my shoulder. "Hi, Jim. I got off on the wrong floor. I'm here to take my wife to dinner. Hopefully she's not too busy with the Lavelle thing." "Oh, no. That's over. Paul's still in the VIP apartment upstairs, but the book's at the printer. Go grab Kim. She deserves a good dinner." He smiled and walked away. I went to Kim's office and saw her in the hall. She looked startled. "Jerry, what are you doing here?" she blurted. "Hi, Kim. I thought we could have dinner out tonight. It's been a while, and I thought we could spend some time together." I saw a flash of annoyance in her eyes. "I can't, Jerry. I'm busy with Paul's novel. Please be patient. This will be over soon, I promise." She patted my cheek and returned to her office. I left, realizing it was almost 11. Kim's promise to be home by 10 was like her other empty promises. I threw the roses, vase and all, into the trash and tossed the earrings into my desk drawer. I went to bed but couldn't sleep, suspecting she was having an affair with LLL. When she came home around 1 a.m., freshly showered, I pretended to be asleep. Her behavior confirmed my suspicions. The next morning, I went to the office to think. I knew my marriage was over and needed evidence of her infidelity. I found a private investigation firm near Van Horn Construction and set up an appointment with Marge DeMarco. At her office, Marge listened to my suspicions and explained the difficulty of gathering legal evidence from the VIP apartment. "Marge, I don't care about legality. I just want confirmation," I insisted. She looked at me with pity. "Okay, Jerry, give us a couple of weeks. Here's our fee information and contract. Sign it and mail it back with a check. We'll start Monday. I nodded, shook her hand, and left feeling a bit better for taking action. When I got home, Kim was in the kitchen, furious. God damn it, Jerry, where did you go? Do you remember it's our anniversary? Did you get me a card or make any gesture? I stood silently, realizing she was trying to deflect the blame. Kimberly, I replied calmly, today is the 11th. Our anniversary was yesterday. The roses I got you are in the trash. I canceled our dinner reservations. If you look in my desk, you'll find the gift I got you. Clearly, last night was more important, considering you stayed out until almost 1 a.m. She looked frightened, her eyes darting everywhere, avoiding my gaze. She pouted but tried to collect herself. I'm sorry, Jerry, she said, sitting on the sofa. I don't know where I am half the time. This campaign has me frazzled. It's over, Jerry. The campaign is finally over. Let's try to forget the past couple of months and work on our marriage. She didn't know that I knew the project had ended long ago. Her guilt was evident. I didn't escalate the situation, but the tension remained all week. Kim was home every evening around 5, indicating her affair with LLL had ended, but it was too late for me. The trust was gone, and our marriage felt like a charade. A few days later, Ben Klein called. Jerry, have you thought about moving out here? The opportunities are unlimited. We could use a good electrical engineer. Ben had been trying to get me to move for a while. It's an idea, Ben. I'm not sure, but we can talk about it again. A few days later, Marge DeMarco called me to her office. Jerry, I have some news, but I don't know if you'll be happy. We haven't found any evidence to confirm your suspicions, so I'm refunding a portion of our fee. Our inquiries into Paul LLL's background revealed he's a womanizer, with 3 settled maltreatment complaints and 2 divorces linked to him. I'm sorry we couldn't be more help. I was disappointed but resigned. I called John Kramer, an attorney, and made an appointment for 10 days later. It was time to end this. Meanwhile, Kim and I tiptoed around each other. A couple of days before my appointment, Kim rushed into the house agitated. Jerry, sit down. I need to talk to you. I know we didn't want children, but I'm pregnant. We're going to be parents. Jerry, please don't be angry. Please be happy for us. She looked at me, anxiety written all over her face. I was stunned, completely floored. For a moment, I couldn't even think. Then the absurdity hit me. Kim had always been careless with her birth control pills, and now she was pregnant with LLL's child, trying to convince me it was mine. I felt a mix of rage and devastation. I realized she had betrayed me, and it left me feeling empty and cold inside. I'll pack a few things and leave. I'll get the rest later when you're not here, I said. Kim looked frightened and started to cry. I'm sorry, Jerry, you don't know how sorry I am. Why, Kim, was our marriage so unimportant to you? I asked softly. She looked at me with watery eyes. I asked myself that too. Maybe it was the excitement, the glamour. I have no excuses. I was weak and foolish. I let myself be seduced by Paul and the job. I didn't realize how deep I was until it was too late, she said, crying. I'm so ashamed. Lying to you about the baby was despicable. I'm truly sorry. Is there any way? She asked, already knowing the answer. No, I replied. I have an appointment with John Kramer. Get a lawyer. We'll split what we have and finalize the divorce without problems. I packed a bag and left. Kim was still crying as I walked out. Telling Bernie Van Horn was one of the hardest things I've ever done. Why, Jerry? Why haven't I treated you well? You're like a son to me, Bernie said with tears in his eyes. Bernie, I can't give you details, but Kim will explain. She left me with no choice. You've been like a second father to me, and I'm grateful, but I can't explain more, I said, struggling to hold back my emotions. Bernie seemed to understand and placed his hand on my shoulder. Okay, Jerry, do what you have to do. Promise you'll let me help you whenever I can, he said. I nodded and left. I spent the next week at a Hilton, trying to process everything. I filed for divorce, knowing it wouldn't be contested. Realizing there was nothing left for me here, I called Ben Klein and was on a plane to LA within a week. Ben had already submitted my resume to his company, and I started the job a few days after arriving. I stayed with Ben and his wife Rachel for a couple of weeks until I found an apartment near work. Rachel, who I'd only talked to on the phone before, was warm and welcoming. She made me feel more than just a guest in their home. She was about 53, beautifully built with dark hair and brown eyes. She became a special friend, and I was happy for both Ben and Rachel. Weeks passed, and I threw myself into work, grateful for the distraction. The nights were tough, filled with dark dreams and memories of Kim. Sometimes I drank too much and let my anger out by smashing things, then passed out on the sofa. I missed the Kim I had married, not the one who betrayed me. I wondered if her infidelity was partly my fault, but I couldn't forgive her or accept the child. Ben and Rachel kept me sane. They invited me to spend weekends at their place, go camping, or set me up on blind dates, which I avoided. I spent many weekends with them, finding some peace by their pool. Bernie and Catherine Van Horn also called occasionally, never mentioning Kim, just checking in. Their concern touched me. Things got weird at Ben and Rachel's. They were like family, but Rachel's bikinis got skimpier, and awkward encounters happened often. Rachel would be in the hall in her underwear, or a barely there bikini. I felt uncomfortable but didn't want to make a move on Rachel. One Saturday, Ben went to get beer, insisting I stay. I came out of the bathroom and saw Rachel in a short silk robe, wide open with nothing underneath. She took my hand and led me to the patio. "Rachel, tie your robe. Ben will be home soon," I stammered. She ignored me and said, "Don't worry about Ben. We need to talk." She sat across from me, her robe open. "Jerry, stop feeling sorry for yourself. You're not the only guy who got crapped on. You can't avoid women forever." I blushed, panicking. Rachel stood, let the robe fall, and took my hand. "Don't worry, Jerry. I'm not going to screw you. Ben and I thought this might snap you out of your depression." She put the robe back on and tied it. "We did this out of love and affection for you." "Holy crap, Rachel, what's Ben going to think of this?" I asked, worried. Rachel smiled. "Don't worry, Jerry. Ben knows exactly what I intended to do and he agreed. He trusts you with his life, and he feels the same about me. He thought this might help you get back in the game." Ben returned later, grinning. His humor eased my guilt. To defend myself, I started accepting blind dates they set up. Surprisingly, many of the women were nice, and I enjoyed the dates, even though I knew they wouldn't go anywhere. I still loved Kim and missed her terribly. Letting go of that love was my biggest obstacle. What kept me grounded was the companionship of Ben and Rachel. They constantly invited me over and encouraged me to date. Spending weekends by their pool helped me relax. Bernie and Catherine Van Horn also kept in touch, showing genuine concern, so I started to move on. I joined a health club, took a cooking class, and even considered joining a library group. Ben and Rachel were happy I was back in the game. I kept busy with work and occasional dates, slowly recovering from my breakup with Kim. 2 years passed since I moved to the West Coast. I operated in a semi-fog, going through the motions. Then my world changed again. One Thursday evening, my mom called, crying. My dad had a massive stroke and died. I felt lightheaded but knew I had to stay strong. I called Ben. "Ben, my dad had a massive stroke. He died. I need you to contact personnel and get me a leave of absence." "Of course, Jerry. Don't worry about anything here. Just take care of your family," Ben responded sympathetically. I packed and was on a plane to Tampa a few hours later. I landed early the next morning and rented a car. At the house, I found a note from Mrs. Simmons, the neighbor, asking me to call her. "Mrs. Simmons, this is Jerry Ford. I just got your note," she interrupted. "Jerry, your mom had a heart attack and was rushed to the hospital. She'll be fine, so stay calm. I'll be right over." 5 minutes later, Mrs. Simmons, or Katie, arrived and explained everything. My mom had experienced neck and arm pains, and Katie called emergency. Mom was taken to the ER, examined, and scheduled for bypass surgery later in the week. I immediately headed for the door when Katie stopped me. She spoke calmly. "Jerry, wait for me. Give me 15 minutes to get ready, and I'll go with you instead of giving you directions to the hospital." I paused, feeling relief as she hugged me. "Don't worry, Jerry. Your mom will be okay. She's only 56 and has many good years left." "Thanks, Katie. I appreciate your support," I said, grateful for her help. Then I waited for her to get ready. We reached the hospital and I finally saw my mom. She was in shock from my dad's passing and didn't want the surgery. I convinced her she needed to be there for me, and she agreed to the operation. She had surgery days later and recovered. Quickly. Within a week, she was home and we were taking short walks together. During her hospital stay, I arranged my dad's funeral. It was well attended by friends and neighbors, all shocked at his passing at just 60. I insisted my mom not go, due to her recent surgery, promising we would visit his grave when she was ready. I pondered my future while staying with my mom. I felt reluctant to leave her alone. After discussions with Ben and Rachel, I decided to quit my job and move closer to her. Ben arranged for a moving company to pack and ship my things, including my car. Their help was invaluable. Mom's recovery was impressive, though she needed afternoon naps. With my help and Katie's, who was also recently widowed, Mom was doing well. I decided it was time to look for a job. I discussed my plan with Mom. She suggested we pull our resources and start a business together. "I have confidence in you, Jerry. We can be partners. I can run the office, and you can handle the technical work." I was surprised but intrigued. I saw potential in the idea, especially with small contractors needing engineering services. I consulted Ben, who encouraged me to go for it. Mom and I pulled our money and opened a small office. I advertised in local trade publications and introduced myself to contractors. Slowly, work started coming in. Within a few months, we were covering expenses, though not yet making a profit. Then, out of the blue, I received a bid request for a mid-sized office building. I worked on the bid for hours, minimizing my profit margin, and won. I had to expand quickly to meet the deadline, but had enough time to hire more help. Soon, more work came in, and I expanded 3 more times over the next few years until we occupied an entire floor in a new high-rise. I knew I was lucky, hitting a building boom just in time. The first couple of years were all about building the business, leaving me little social time. After about 3 years, I had enough help to cut back on hours, rejoin the gym, and start working out again. Forget cooking classes. I was still terrible, but Mom helped with that. At the gym, I met Mary Susan Black. She was about 55, nicely built, and around my age. One day, I noticed her leotard's lap seam was about to tear. I awkwardly approached her, trying to warn her without embarrassing her. Miss," I stammered. "Look, I really don't want to be," she smiled. "You're really not very good at this, are you? You should practice before trying to introduce yourself to a girl," she giggled, making it less awkward. I whispered about her leotard, and she quickly ran to the locker room. I couldn't get her out of my mind. She didn't show up for a week, and I assumed she was too embarrassed to return, but the next week, she approached me. "Hi," she said. "My name is Mary Black. Thank you for warning me." I smiled. "You're welcome. Would you have lunch with me today?" "I'm Jerry Ford," I said, extending my hand. She smiled and shook my hand, agreeing to lunch. We got to know each other over the next few weeks. Mary was 28, divorced, with a 3-year-old daughter named Stacy. She worked in public relations for an advertising company near the gym. After our third date, I met Stacy. She was a charming little girl with blonde hair and blue eyes, nothing like her mother. Stacy quickly warmed up to me, and Mary was surprised, saying her daughter didn't usually open up to strangers so easily. Dating Mary became even more enjoyable because of Stacy. I liked Mary a lot, but I didn't love her the way I had loved Kimberly. It wasn't fair to compare them, but I knew I was different now too. Mary was pretty dynamic and had a strong personality. She was sweet and kind, especially with Stacy, her 3-year-old daughter, whom I adored like my own. Our relationship was comfortable but not very physical, just some kissing and fumbling. One night at Mary's condo after dinner and some wine, Mary suddenly became very aggressive. We had wild lovemaking and fell asleep together. The next morning, Mary explained that the wine had lowered her inhibitions and she wanted to make love. I reassured her that she was perfect. We continued dating for months and became very comfortable with each other. I introduced Mary and Stacy to my mom, who had retired. Mom adored Stacy, treating her like a grandchild. Stacy loved her Nana, and everything felt right. We never discussed love or the future, but were content with the status quo. Eventually, we decided it was silly to keep running between our places, so I bought a house in a gated golf course community. We moved in 2 months later. Marriage never came up. Both our previous marriages had ended badly, and we were happy without that commitment. Stacy started calling me Daddy, and I felt like her dad. Life was good. The years passed quickly, one blending into another. My company thrived with a great reputation, and I had a strong team to keep it growing. I no longer had to struggle to keep it afloat. I stayed in touch with Bernie and Kate Van Horn, talking a couple of times a year, and always kept in contact with Ben and Rachel. Mary was doing well too, climbing the corporate ladder to become the director of public relations. However, as she advanced, she worked longer hours and traveled more, usually being home around the same time as me, though sometimes late. Stacy grew into a beautiful, kind, and intelligent young woman. Now almost 20, she was finishing her sophomore year at an Ivy League university. Life was good, and until things started to change. Over the past few months, Mary seemed indifferent, apathetic, and preoccupied. I thought it might be my imagination, but I noticed our bed life had become sporadic. We used to have lovemaking 2 or 3 times a week, but now it had been almost 2 weeks since our last time. Mary often said she was tired or had her period. I began to suspect something was wrong, fearing it might be happening again. I decided to talk to Mary after dinner. "Mary," I began, "we need to talk. I feel like something's wrong. You seem distant, and it's like you've forgotten I'm here. What's the problem?" I kept my voice soft and non-accusatory. She stared at me. "What the hell are you talking about, Jerry? Are you getting paranoid? Are you accusing me of something? Get off my back." She then stormed out and slammed the bedroom door. I was stunned. Mary had never spoken to me like that. I realized I had noticed a tone of disrespect, maybe even contempt, from her lately. I wasn't imagining it. I decided to find out what was going on just like I had done years ago. I slept in the guest suite that night. Mary emerged the next morning, red-eyed and tearful, apologizing profusely. We made up and promised not to fight again. Mary blamed job stress, claiming a big client was on the brink of leaving. I didn't believe her and decided to find out what was really going on. Mary's late nights and occasional travel weren't unusual, but recently they'd become more frequent. I suspected something was up and contacted a private investigator. I explained my concerns and provided the necessary details and a hefty check. Over the next few weeks, things were strained between Mary and me. We avoided arguments, but remained wary. I waited for the investigator's report, already suspecting the worst. When the report came, it confirmed my fears. Mary was meeting a man named Howard Branch, a 48-year-old divorced guy. They met at restaurants, held hands, kissed, and checked into hotels. She also saw him during her business trips. I was hurt, but not as devastated as with my first wife. I realized I wasn't strong enough to handle this betrayal. I consulted my attorney, thinking a separation would be simple since we weren't legally married. He warned it could still be messy, and suggested a mutual agreement to avoid court. The following Friday after dinner, I confronted Mary. "How long have you been seeing him?" I asked softly. Mary looked shocked and teary. "I'm sorry, Jerry. I hoped you wouldn't find out," she said, tears streaming down her face. "How long, Mary? I know his name, Howard Branch. Do you love him?" She lowered her head, sobbing. "About 8 months. I saw him at the mall. He's my ex-husband, Stacy's father." It felt like a knife to my chest. "Stacy's father? No, I'm Stacy's father," I exploded. "No one will take that away from me." Mary cowered, crying. "You are Stacy's father. I just meant he's her biological father. Do you love him?" I demanded, trying to stay calm. "I don't know," she wailed. I knew it was a mistake, but I couldn't say no to him. It was like when we first met and married. I couldn't keep away from him. She was crying, gasping for breath, and looking a mess. I handed her some tissues, feeling deflated and sorry for her. My anger had dissipated, replaced by a sense of disappointment. Mary wasn't the same person anymore, and I felt I was back at the start, dealing with another, failed relationship. Despite not being the love of my life, her betrayal hurt deeply. "I'll be sleeping in the guest suite tonight," I told her. "Please move out as soon as you can. We'll tell people we drifted apart." Like my mom and Stacy leaving the room, I felt like an old man. The next morning I went to work, trying to focus, but it was tough. When I returned, Mary was gone. She had taken most of her things but left a letter. "Dearest Jerry, I'm deeply sorry for the hurt I've caused. You've done nothing to deserve my shameful behavior. I don't understand my attraction to Howard. I know he will destroy me. I vowed never to see him again, but I'm unsure if I can keep that promise. You've been kind and loving. None of this is your fault. I've come to love you, which makes my actions even more horrible. I beg you not to hate me. All my love, Mary." I collapsed into a chair, the letter falling to the floor. I knew I would miss Mary, but I also felt relief. I needed solitude to get my head straight. Then a thought struck me. I needed to take care of Howard Branch for Mary and for myself. I had his address and was determined to confront him. That night, I changed clothes and drove to his seedy apartment building. When he opened the door, I pushed him off balance and entered, closing the door behind me. He yelled, "I'm going to tear your head off," but 5 seconds later, he was on the floor, moaning. I pulled him into a sitting position and began to explain the situation. "Listen carefully, Howard. My name is Jerry Ford. My friend's name is Mary Black. Understand?" I slapped him, and he nodded quickly. "Good," I continued. "I'm going to show you pain, but I won't leave many marks." For the next minutes, I inflicted pain until he threw up twice and begged me to stop. I got a glass of water from his kitchen, threw it in his face, and then let him drink. I turned his face to me and said, "Pack your stuff and leave this area, the southeast part of the country. Try California, Oregon, or Washington. If you're here 24 hours from now, you'll end up in a wheelchair for life. Do you understand?" He nodded vigorously. I drove home, showered for half an hour, feeling sick about what I had done. I rationalized that it would benefit Mary, freeing her from Branch. But deep down, I knew my actions were partly for revenge. I shook it off, deciding not to agonize over it. Howard Branch was gone the next day. Talking with my mom and then Stacy was tough. They couldn't understand, and I refused to go into detail. Stacy threatened to fly home, but both Mary and I were firm and finally convinced her to stay at school. We'd talk later. I suspected Mary eventually told Stacy what had happened. When I spoke to my daughter next, she seemed subdued and sad. "I'll always love you, Dad," she said, and it warmed my heart. Days and weeks went by. I got on with my life as it was. I had to decide about the company. Should I sell it or not? The potential buyer was patient, but wouldn't wait forever. He told me to take my time, saying there's no rush, but he gave me a deadline. That date was approaching fast. I had a month. I wanted to sell and be free of the responsibility, but it was the only thing that gave my life purpose. What would I do if I sold it? So I procrastinated. Finally, a week before the deadline, I called and canceled the buyout. I would keep the company. Weeks turned into months, and I became reflective, realizing I was now over 49 years old and nearing 50. What did I have to show for it? A successful company, and a young lady who was my daughter in almost every sense. Stacy called every week without fail, and a solitary existence. Did I miss Mary? Sure, but it felt like missing Ben and Rachel. We had good years together, but we moved on. The last I heard, Mary was doing well at her job and dating. She would find someone. Did I mind being alone? Not really, I told myself. I guess I had gotten used to it. Jerry, I heard Gail, my secretary, on the intercom. You have a visitor. I was busy with specs for a proposed job and was deeply involved. I was abrupt with her. Damn it, Gail, I'm busy. Handle it for me. She persisted. Jerry, I think you'll want to see him. It's Bernard Van Horn. And I could hear the laughter in her voice. Everyone here knew who Bernard Van Horn was. I froze for a second, then jumped to my feet and rushed out of my office. There, standing by Gail's desk, tall, slim, and white-haired, looking much younger than his 70-some years, was Bernie Van Horn. I hugged him tightly, a lump in my throat preventing me from speaking right away. He hugged me back and patted my back. Okay, Jerry, let me breathe, he laughed. I stepped back and just looked at him. Damn, we had kept in touch, but this was my first time seeing him in about 20 years. I quickly ushered him into my office, and we sat in the small sitting area. I still couldn't believe my eyes. We talked, catching up on each other's lives. I knew he had recently sold his company. He told me he and Kate had moved to Naples a few weeks ago. They had discussed it for years but never acted on it. On a whim, they flew down a month ago, looked at some properties, saw a home on the Gulf, fell in love with it, and bought it quickly. Bernie asked about my business and why I decided not to sell. I explained my reasons, and he nodded in understanding. Jerry, you know you'll have to visit us now that we're so close. Kate would be really upset if you didn't. I assured him I would, and we reminisced more. I talked about the early days of starting my company on a shoestring, barely making it before getting a couple of breaks. I saw a twinkle in his eyes, and then it hit me. My God, what an idiot I was. I never suspected, but I should have. It was Bernie. He gave my company the push it needed. I stumbled over my words trying to express my gratitude. Don't be silly. All I did was call in a couple of favors. You took the ball and ran with it, and everyone saw the excellence of your work. Your company's success was due to your talent and hard work. I did very little, he said dismissively. There was a lull in our conversation, and I saw him looking at me expectantly. I knew what he was waiting for, and it was time anyway. I really wanted to know. I was more than curious but also afraid. I knew that by opening this up I might face more heartache. Bernie, how is Kimberly? Is she okay? Is she happy? I truly hope she's well, I said quietly. I saw Bernie sit back and let out a soft breath. I've been waiting a long time for you to ask, Jerry. Thank you. Thank you for asking. Kate will be so happy you did. Now, about Kimberly. Bernie shifted in his chair, hesitated a bit, collected his thoughts, and began. It's been a long time since you left, and a lot has happened to her. I steeled myself, knowing her child was now grown. I expected to hear she had married and had a family. For some reason, I just didn't want to hear that. I really didn't want to hear that. Jerry, Bernie continued, Kim lost the baby about a month after you left. She had a malfunction, the doctor said. She wouldn't be able to conceive again. I don't remember why. I'm not sure I understood it then. She had already quit her job at the publishing company. The divorce, malfunction, and aftermath left her clinically depressed. No, Jerry, it wasn't your fault. Don't start blaming yourself. What happened to Kim was her own doing, and she knew that. Her stupidity, as she called it, destroyed her world. We were really worried about her. It took months of therapy for her to recover. In a sad way, what happened changed her. She became more mature, responsible, and compassionate. I didn't know what to say. This was all new information, and it shook me. I had emotions roiling inside me but couldn't identify them. One thing was clear. Kim still stirred feelings in me. Me just talking about her did that. Bernie shifted in his chair again. When things settled down and Kim was recovering, she told us she wanted to study medicine. We were stunned and thought it was part of her depression. But she assured us she had thought it through and really wanted to do it. Long story short, she enrolled at Penn's medical school and became an MD, specializing in pediatric oncology. She knew she'd never have children and wanted to help others. Bernie paused and watched me. I didn't know what to say. Kim had loved her job as an editor, so it was shocking she had resigned. Maybe the pregnancy caused that. Losing the baby must have been devastating for her, though I couldn't muster sorrow for it, given how she got pregnant. The rest of what Bernie told me stunned me. She couldn't have children, became a doctor, and specialized in pediatric oncology. Was this the Kim I knew? It was hard to process. "Do you know why we moved here, Jerry?" Bernie asked. "The biggest reason? We wanted to be near Kim. We wanted to be near our daughter." I looked at him, blankly. Near her? What? I sounded like an idiot. I was overloaded with information. "Kim is here," Bernie said. "She accepted the position as Chief of Pediatric Oncology at the Cancer Center at the University in Tampa. She's been on the job for a couple of months now." "Jerry, would you like to see her? Say hello, maybe?" "No, don't panic. She doesn't know I'm here. She'd be pissed if she knew I suggested it, but she knows you're in Tampa." "Do you think that influenced her decision?" he teased with a twinkle in his eyes. "Jerry, all kidding aside, she would have accepted the job because it's what she wanted. But knowing you were here gave her pause. It's not that she didn't want to see you, she didn't want to complicate your life." I shook my head. I had to process everything Bernie was telling me. It was too much. I had to sort it all out. Bernie saw my confusion and stood up. "Okay, Jerry, I know I just unloaded a lot on you. Think it over. I'll be in touch." I managed to stand up and walk him to the door. I watched him walk down the hall, then returned to my desk, asking Gail to make sure I wasn't disturbed. I had a lot to think about. Kim is actually here in Tampa." My pulse quickened. I knew the questions I had to ask myself. What did I feel for Kim? Did I still love her? These were questions I'd avoided for years, but now they demanded answers. I wasn't going to lie to myself. I knew I loved Kim, but the Kim I married. What did I feel for this new Kim, the doctor in her mid-40s? I knew I had to see her, meet her, speak with her. Bernie and I kept in touch. I visited him and Kate in Naples and was relieved but sorry Kim wasn't there. I wanted to see her but was fearful of what I might feel or not feel. I was a mess. One Saturday, Kate called and invited me down for the day. It was sunny and hot, and I had a few bathing suits there. I packed a clean shirt and drove down I-75. I let myself in the front door and called out their names. In the large sunroom at the back, I saw Kim standing by the sliding glass doors. My breath caught. She was about 20 feet away, silhouetted by the sun, but I knew it was her. My mind went back through the years. She hadn't changed, still trim, taut, and well-groomed. I walked over, and we stood gazing at each other. "Kim," I said softly. "Hello, Jerry. It's good to see you." She extended a hand. I took it, and we shook hands as if meeting for the first time. In a sense, we were. "Jerry," Kim continued, "we didn't mean to trick you by my being here today. I begged my parents to let me do this. I really wanted to see you. I hope you're not angry with me or them." No, of course not," I reassured her. "It's nice to see you again. And Kim, you look lovely," I added impulsively. I was oddly pleased to see her blush and smile. We moved into the solarium and sat on a white wicker set around a low glass-topped coffee table. Our conversation was initially awkward, with unnecessary pauses, but that didn't last long. After a few false starts, we both chuckled at the awkwardness and then relaxed a bit. The conversation started to flow more easily, with Kim telling me about her career and me sharing what I had been doing over the past few years. She already knew about Mary, thanks to Bernie and Kate. My mind was operating on two levels. Consciously, I participated in our conversation, mundane as it was. On another level, I was observing Kim, trying to understand her as a person. Despite the years, she still looked great. She wore a casual cotton polo and khaki shorts, showing off her tanned legs. Her hair was shorter than I remembered, and there were faint lines at the corners of her eyes and mouth. She looked terrific, but her eyes were different. There was a calm, mature confidence and tranquility I had never seen before. This was a self-assured, highly skilled professional, comfortable in her own skin. This was not the Kim I had courted and married, nor the Kim I had divorced and left. This was a whole new woman, and I realized I wanted to get to know her. We spent the day talking, having lunch she prepared, and lounging by the pool. I felt myself warming to her on different levels. I was attracted to her for the same reasons I had been when we were young, but she was so much more now. It was almost dusk when I realized the time. "Kim, would you like to have dinner with me?" I asked hopefully. She smiled. "Jerry, I would love to, but I'm due at the center tonight. Can we make it tomorrow?" We did, and we have been dating for the past 2 weeks. Is dating the right word? I knew I loved Kim. I guess I always have, and I love the woman she has become even more. Does she feel the same about me? We haven't discussed such carnal subjects yet. We were just dating as friends. The only physical contact we had were soft kisses to end the evening. Where will this end? I really don't know, but I'm hopeful. Judge ordered me to pay my cheating wife, so I exposed her affair, took my money, and disappeared. Wanda Nealon has granted use of the house until the children graduate from high school, with Mr. Nealon continuing mortgage and utility payments. She is also entitled to half the value of her husband's business, and Mr. Nealon will maintain payments for her vehicle. Mrs. Nealon is awarded 60% of all assets, encompassing bank accounts, investments, and retirement accounts. Additionally, primary custody of the children is granted to Mrs. Nealon, with visitation following standard protocols, including Mr. Nealon having 2 consecutive weeks during the summer and every other weekend. Child support is set at per month per child, totaling, per month. Considering Mrs. Nealon's absence from the workforce for the last years, maintenance of, per month, is added. The divorce will be finalized in days unless Mr. Nealon revokes the petition. Concluding the proceedings, Judge Marie Matthews banged her gavel as she began to rise. I uttered the single word that would lead to changes dominating the next several months of my life. I responded to her challenge, stating that I wasn't sure what was difficult to understand. I offered to provide a definition if the word was challenging for her. Judge Matthews froze mid-motion, her head swiveling so fast that it seemed her neck might snap off. A look of disbelief adorned her face, as if she couldn't fathom someone stating that word in her presence. Slowly, she returned to her chair. As she moved, her features shifted from shock to abject fury. Once she regained her former position, the frosty glare she directed at me could easily have frozen water on the surface of the sun. To say she was angry would be an understatement. She declared that she wasn't stupid and knew what was about to happen. She didn't care. The next few minutes were planned, and she gave me 1 minute to apologize, or she would cite me for contempt of court. I spoke, saying that at least she would have made one correct ruling that day. I expressed having nothing but contempt for the situation. My lawyer harshly whispered in my ear, fumbling through his briefcase, possibly searching for something to silence me. In response, she sneered, striking her gavel again, and threatened to see how much contempt I would have after 30 days in jail. I retorted by suggesting days and wondered if she cared to try for more, expressing my belief that if she got laid occasionally, she might not be such a difficult person. I extended my right hand with the middle finger up, while mimicking the gesture with my left hand. I suggested she could ride them to a climax, perhaps making her less of the person she appeared to be. In my view, she was in more dire need of a change than any woman in history. Holy. I reflected on the situation, thinking that someone might have dialed emergency around that time. I considered 2 possibilities. Either she was on the verge of a stroke, or her head was going to explode. Surprisingly, the smoke coming out of her ears wasn't visible. I didn't think it was possible for someone's face to turn that shade of red. After my outburst, she was clearly upset, and she sentenced me to 90 days. Her voice sounded satanic, and the bailiffs took hold of me. My lawyer had a woeful look on his face, and the courtroom was shocked when I couldn't hold in my laughter. This probably explained the visits by psychologists I had in lockup over the next couple of weeks. The letter from my lawyer's law firm the next day, stating they were dropping me as a client, was not a surprise. So, you're probably wondering what all that was about. Perhaps a little background is in order. My name is Michael Nealon, and I'm currently 31 years old. I was born to a very nice middle-class couple in the heartland of America. I was raised on traditional values where there was a strong sense of right and wrong. You respected those that deserved respect, and you didn't cheat. When you gave your word, it meant something. The ethos I grew up with was to work hard, be generous with what you have, and live up to your values. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Of course, most people never think about the flip side to that. Do unto others as they have done unto you. The Christian thing to do is to turn the other cheek, but unfortunately, I have never been good at that. I've always had what has been described as an extreme stubborn streak combined with my sense of justice. Well, it sometimes got kind of ugly when I made up my mind that someone had done me wrong and set a course of action to deal with it. Nothing could dissuade me from my path. There was one time in high school when I was going out with Cheryl Haskins. We had been dating for a couple of months by this time, and we had an argument about something leading to our breakup. I put that in quotes because it was kind of understood that it was only temporary, and we would apologize to each other a couple of days later and get back together. It wasn't the first time that it happened. We would just use the weekend to cool off and make up on Monday. Unfortunately, I happened to be walking past the theater on Saturday evening and saw my cousin Harold escorting Cheryl into the theater. Two things here. Harold and I were more like brothers than cousins. We were the same age and had been practically inseparable for as long as I can remember. His family lived on the same block as me, and we grew up together. Second, I knew that he also liked Cheryl. He knew that we had broken up, but he also knew that we would probably get back together after the weekend. But we simply don't do that to each other. From that moment on, he was dead to me. When Cheryl tried to talk to me on Monday, I simply refused to acknowledge her presence. At church on Sunday, Harold came up to me and tried to talk. I stared at him without saying a word. When he finished talking, I turned around and walked away. His family came over for Sunday dinner. I ignored him. He tried to play video games with me. I stopped playing and went to my room. Our parents tried several times to get me to talk to him, but I refused every time. Even a year later, after I actually took his girlfriend from him, I still refused to have anything to do with him. Oh, I did smack him up when he confronted me about stealing his girlfriend, but that was it. He sent me a wedding invitation years later. I ignored it. When I married Wanda, every member of my extended family got an invitation except him. Okay, so I'm a bit of an idiot and hold a grudge. The thing is, when someone wrongs me, I don't forgive unless it was an honest mistake. What Harold and Cheryl did was intentional. Right now, many of you think I'm an idiot. If that's the case, let me annoy you snowflakes a bit more. I firmly believe that you shouldn't do the crime if you can't do the time. If you are foolish and mess up, you should fully face the consequences of your actions. If you drive drunk and get caught, expect to lose your license for a while, pay higher insurance, and perform community service or whatever else is involved. If your job depends on you driving, you lose your job. I call that a foolish tax. If a girl chooses to engage without protection and ends up pregnant at 18 years old, her foolish tax is being called mommy for the next 18 years. If a guy chooses to bump bellies with his prom date and impregnates her, he should be required to step up and take care of the kid he was half responsible for. Choices have consequences. It's called personal responsibility. I refuse to have to pay for someone else's idiocy. So I worked hard through high school and got pretty good grades. I earned some nice scholarships and went to college. I did well with the ladies and still kept my grades up. I was always on the better-looking side, and I worked to maintain my health. Yeah, I had gotten into more than my fair share of fights in high school because of my personal beliefs. I won more than I lost. Still, I was in good physical shape, and it seemed that the women found me attractive enough. I graduated with an economics degree and an accounting minor. I went on to get my MBA, then got a decent job at a large company, making really good money. Being single with not a lot of bills to pay, I began playing the stock market. I found I kind of had a knack for that and made out rather well. I had been working for a few months when I met Wanda at a party. We hit it off well, and I asked her out on a date. She accepted, and it went from there. I have to say, she was beautiful. I kind of laugh at that. Seriously, how many guys ever say that their girlfriend is ugly? Sure, she may be unattractive to someone else, but to them, she is beautiful. Anyway, I can say that Wanda is beautiful because she always attracts stares whenever we are out, and every one of my friends has commented on how they will try to move in if we ever break up. Even some of my lesbian friends have commented on trying to turn her if she becomes available. I eventually asked, she accepted, and we got married. I should probably mention that Wanda did go to college. I like to joke that she went for her Mrs. degree. She didn't get that, but she did graduate with a degree in art history, which qualified her for her job as a barista at Starbucks. For those who are confused, an MSS degree signifies a girl that goes to college to put off adulting for a few years and graduates with a husband to take care of them for the rest of their lives. Yes, I'm an arrogant idiot. Get lost. So we settled into marital bliss. She quit her job a week before the wedding and settled into becoming Susie Homemaker. Our bed life was great, and we bought a nice 3-bedroom house. I was doing well at my job, as well as raking in some nice money playing the stock market. We weren't really living extravagantly, so we were able to set aside a considerable amount of cash. All my bonuses went into our investments, along with maxing out my WTH contributions. I aimed to retire before I turned 40 and save for life. Excelling in my profession, my employer rewarded me with substantial bonuses and promotions, putting me on the fast track up the corporate ladder. A few years into our marriage, I returned home one Friday evening to find Wanda dressed to the nines with a huge smile on her face. "Hurry up and get showered and changed. We're going out to celebrate tonight, Daddy." Holy moly, did she just say what I thought she said? I was shocked. We had been trying for a few months now, so it wasn't like this just came out of the blue. Still, it was a surprise when she said that it finally happened. I took her in my arms and swung her around as I planted kisses all over her face. Figuring that we would be muting our celebrations because of her pregnancy and then the baby for a while, we lit up the town that night. The next several months consisted of joyous times and preparing for the new life that we were bringing into the world. We got another shock a couple of months later, twins. There were 2 little girls in there. I couldn't wait until I could start spoiling them and having 2 little daddy's girls wrapping me around their fingers. I was on top of the world. The day finally came. We rushed to the hospital and our 2 little girls were born a few hours later. They were beautiful, healthy, and had all their fingers and toes. Being twins, they had to stay in the hospital a couple of days longer than normal, but everything turned out fine. When we took them home, both families were there to greet us. Everyone was happy. I noticed my mom staring at them almost constantly. I think she was so happy because I finally gave her the grandchildren she had been wanting. So, life had changed for us. I decided that working for the big company was keeping me away from my family too much. I had a ton of money available, so I decided to form my own company. I was doing pretty well investing and playing the market, so I decided to get the necessary licenses and open my own investment firm. I had already been helping a few of my friends and relatives, so I talked to them about becoming official clients. That started things moving. Once I opened, I had several former CEO workers move their portfolios over to me as well. Within a year, I had a decent client list, and several of them were discussing with their friends about moving over to me as well. When you're on top of the world, the only direction you can go is down. It was the girls' second birthday party. We turned it into a full-on production. Sure, they would never remember it, but it was a celebration. They would be able to watch the videos of when they were older and enjoy it then. All the family from both sides was there. We were all having a phenomenal time. Just before I was about to come out of the bedroom after using the ensuite bathroom, the hall bathroom had been in use. I heard my mom talking to her sister in the hallway. She mentioned that she couldn't figure out where those blue eyes came from. Her sister Mayan suggested asking me about it. Mom replied, saying that she couldn't imagine what would happen if I found out that they weren't mine. She expressed concern about how happy I was and believed that it would probably be devastating for me. I couldn't listen to the rest. I quietly retraced my steps back to the bathroom and locked the door behind me. I had to think, they had to be mine, surely. Someone in our families had blue eyes. My eyes were kind of a mud brown, Wanda's were more hazel, I thought. I went through a mental picture of everyone, all my relatives. The lone person I could think of without brown eyes was my cousin Mary, whose green eyes originated from her non-blood-related father's side. Contemplating Wanda's family, I couldn't recall anyone on her side with blue eyes. After a while, I realized I needed to compose myself and rejoin the festivities before being missed. Suppressing my emotions, I put on a cheerful demeanor and returned to the party, enduring a challenging day. Although I acted as expected, I mentally strategized about what to do later. Eventually, things quieted down, everyone departed, and while putting the girls to bed that night, I scrutinized their features. Some resembled Wanda, but others were unfamiliar, and I found none definitively attributable to me. The next day, while Wanda napped with the girls, I ordered supplies delivered to my office, using a company credit card to keep the invoice hidden. Simultaneously, I researched local PI firms, as the suspicion that Wanda had cheated on me nearly 3 years ago became overwhelming. If she did cheat, then was she still involved in infidelity? I needed proof. A few days later, the ordered items arrived, and I had also met with and hired a company named Pro Investigations, providing them with all the necessary information to hack into Wanda's cell phone, tablet, and laptop. Concurrently, I initiated some financial moves. If she wasn't cheating and the girls were genuinely mine, these actions wouldn't matter. However, if my suspicions were accurate, it would safeguard my money from her reach. I refused to fund her unfaithfulness or someone else's children. While the girls were innocent sufferers, so was I. If she chose to mess around and get pregnant by someone else, they could bear the financial responsibility. Nothing was finalized, but I awaited the proof. 2 weeks later, I received the letter at the office. Locking my door, I opened it and cried for an hour upon confirming they weren't mine. Deep down, I had sensed the truth but clung to hope. The following day, my PI met with me, providing all the proof he had obtained. Wanda was still involved with her blonde-haired, blue-eyed personal trainer, meeting him a couple of days a week, and even taking the girls to his apartment. The audio confirmed their awareness of the real seed donor. The subsequent afternoon, I consulted a divorce lawyer. Rejecting his conventional advice, prioritizing the children's well-being, I insisted on preparing the documents but delayed filing until deemed appropriate. The preparations took 2 months, and with zero net income and assets on paper, I left Wanda surprised when my cousin Howard and his wife Cheryl showed up that weekend. I explained that Howard and Cheryl had come to see me in my office a couple of weeks ago, After some serious discussions, they acknowledged their wrongdoing, sincerely apologized, and I decided it was time to let things go. God damn, you people are so gullible. Yes, we reconciled. It's entirely true that Howard and Cheryl did visit me in my office last week. They did apologize again. That's all accurate. I'm an honest man, and I'm not lying about any of that. I genuinely forgave them and welcomed them back into my life. However, I may have overlooked a couple of irrelevant details, just coincidences. Cheryl's family includes members who, let's say, aren't above bending a few minor laws. Some are large and don't hesitate to engage in the occasional barroom brawl. There's even speculation, irrelevant to this story, that a few might be enforcers for a local group of shadier businessmen. But it's just gossip from those who don't like them. A couple of days before Howard and Cheryl's visit, there was a news story about a personal trainer at a local gym being mugged shortly after leaving work. Foolishly attempting to fight off the 5 muggers, they took his wallet, car, and stripped him undressed, proceeding to brutally assault him, resulting in a broken jaw, shattered nose, broken ribs, a broken arm, dislocated kneecap, and ruptured testicles. He'll be in the hospital for at least a couple of weeks. The police should address the crime issue in town, but there are no suspects since the attackers wore dark clothes, gloves, and ski masks. Doctors expect the blonde-haired, blue-eyed sufferer to fully recover after reconstructive surgery and significant physical therapy, although engaging in closeness might be unlikely over the next couple of months. He'll discover his car was taken to a chop shop, his credit cards maxed out, bank accounts emptied, and his identity stolen for the dark web, leading to years of legal battles. Surprisingly, Wanda was despondent for about a week after the mugging, possibly concerned about the rising crime rate. Despite my offer to enhance home security, she remained unsettled. On Monday morning, I instructed my lawyer to complete the paperwork and file it, aiming to have her served on Friday in the late afternoon. He attempted to persuade me to make changes, but I remained firm. By Tuesday, the forms were ready for my review and signature. Meeting him at his office to finalize everything, he once again warned me against my course of action. After some thought, I decided to humor him by giving her the house and even throwing in the investments. However, I made it clear I wouldn't pay a dime beyond that. If she chose to keep the house, she'd be responsible for the mortgage and utilities. Notably, there hadn't been a dime in the investment accounts for over a month. I had no issue giving her 100% of zero. Unbeknownst to Wanda, I had been relocating all my tools and equipment from the garage gradually. I also moved belongings I wanted to keep out of the house, mostly from my home office. Tools and larger items found storage on Howard and Cheryl's ranch, while less valuable smaller items were transferred to a one-bedroom apartment in a complex owned by an offshore LLC. The owners of the LLC were surprisingly challenging to locate and verify. Friday morning arrived at last. I headed to work as usual. A couple of days earlier, I had Howard assist me in moving my truck to the office. I left my car, got into the pickup, and drove to the bank. At the bank, I cleared out all the accounts, leaving $100 in checking and savings. Next, I emptied the safety deposit box. I then drove to the ranch and combined all the cash and contents of the safety deposit box with my other belongings. I didn't want to risk them discovering a newly rented box at another bank and seizing it. Also, I wanted to avoid anyone tracing a wire transfer. Besides, I anticipated needing the cash later. You might be wondering why I trusted Howard and Cheryl. It was straightforward. The mortgage on their ranch was held by a certain offshore LLC with murky ownership. Moreover, despite our issues, Howard is still family to us, and you don't mess with family. The rest of the family takes such matters personally. There was much joy in the family when Howard and I finally reconciled. Returning home late morning, I pulled over a couple of blocks away to check the GPS I had installed on Wanda's car. As expected, she was at the mall. Rushing home, I parked in the driveway. Over the past few days, I had packed up the rest of my clothes and belongings and placed them in the garage. Tossing the few boxes in the truck, I went inside, grabbed the remaining clothes from the closet, and dresser not bothering to pack them, just grabbing them by the armload, hangers and all. It took only a couple of trips to toss them all inside the cab of the truck. I didn't bother closing the garage or even the front door. My cell phone rang as I was leaving the house. It was Wanda, presumably because her cards didn't work when she tried to check out. Glancing at the GPS signal moving in my direction, I laughed, tossed my phone onto the table and walked out the door. Within minutes, I was several blocks away. Arriving at my new apartment, I transferred everything from my truck into the appropriate rooms. 3 beers later, everything was put away, and as I sat back in my recliner, my new cell phone rang. Only a couple of people had this number, and my soon-to-be ex-wife was not one of them. I answered the call, and the voice on the other end informed me that she had been served. They assured me that I would have the video shortly. I responded with a simple, "Okay, thank you," before disconnecting. True to their word, 15 minutes later, I received the video in my email. To say she was shocked would be an understatement. Unfortunately, the video only covered her being served until she dropped to the floor. The process server checked to ensure she wasn't injured and then left. The video concluded at that point. I would have liked to witness her reaction once she began reading the divorce petition, realizing I had DNA and video evidence of her infidelity. From that moment on, things moved at the speed of a glacier. I received several phone calls, a few from my old office, as she had called multiple times trying to reach me. Apparently, she didn't believe them when they informed her that I had resigned and hadn't worked there for the last 2 weeks. She even showed up in person demanding to see me, but that didn't end well for her. It took the police being called to escort her off the property. Howard made a couple of calls. She began pressuring him to reach me, suspecting his sudden appearance was too coincidental with my abrupt divorce. Restraining orders for my former company and Howard were filed, compelling her to cease. 2 weeks later, my lawyer finally contacted her to find out who her lawyer was, but she hadn't hired one yet. First off, she was quickly running out of money. All she had was the cash in her purse and I left in the bank accounts. She started leaning on her parents for support. I relaxed without starting any projects, planning to be unavailable for a while and the desire to avoid leaving anything she could take. Eventually, she got a lawyer, and meetings were scheduled. I declined to attend, giving my lawyer firm instructions, not a single penny more. Tempers flared at those meetings, leading to arbitration, which I had to attend, but they didn't go well. During the proceedings, questions arose about the whereabouts of the money. Accusations were thrown, with her questioning, "Where's all the money, idiot? What money? All our money? We're flat broke. In fact, I'm living in the cheapest single-bedroom apartment I could find, chosen for affordability and my acquaintance with the owner. All investments, checking, and savings disappeared due to a disastrous investment. Investing in a cheating wife? Well, that was true. I didn't know where all those offshore banks kept their cash. We're giving her the house, with her name as the only one on the title. My lawyer suggested he could have been more forceful, but he sounded like someone observing a tornado-ravaged house, commenting that at least the rubble hadn't caught on fire. The mortgage is maxed out and I can't possibly afford the monthly payments, Wanda screamed, and it pretty much went downhill from there. Child support. Not my kids, not my problem. Spousal maintenance, alimony for you Felicians out there. No job, no income, no way. She demands 70% of the liquid assets, but there are none. 50% of the business good luck. 150% of the retirement lost at all. Arbitration failed spectacularly. That brings us to our day in court, facing the dishonorable Judge Marie Matthews. She was the most feminist, man-hating family court judge, harsher on men whose wives cheated. Yeah, I was screwed. Planning to criticize me for thinking I could convince them there was no money? You'd be wrong. Aware they could check accounts, I wasn't surprised when the judge used those numbers to calculate my liabilities. The thing is, they had no way to access it. I needed the time to transfer funds around through different banks and different accounts. I even went so far as to personally pull all the money out of one bank, then deposited parts of the withdrawal into several other accounts at separate banks. Of course, those accounts were in several different names. One of those rather shady businesses that Cheryl's family was involved with was a gag gift shop where you could buy fake IDs for entertainment purposes, only that was even printed on the ID cards. I possessed an ID claiming I was Jesus Christ, enhancing pranks. When sufferers exclaimed, "Jesus Christ," I'd reveal my fake ID, costing about, skillfully crafted, with the only giveaway being the entertainment statement. For a higher fee, they'd omit the warning. I electronically transferred money to other accounts, potentially traceable but costly and time-consuming. Now back in front of the man-hating judge, 60 days into my 90-day county jail stay short-term sentences are served in the county jail, not state prison. She sneered and asked if I had learned my lesson yet. I responded, "About not marrying a cheating spouse? I grasped that long before your court." She clarified that she meant my attitude in her court. The vein on her forehead was popping, not ideal for her blood pressure. I dismissed any issues with my attitude, expressing concern about her health while being railroaded in front of kangaroos, and suggested her blood pressure must spike during doctor visits. She warned me that she could extend my stay in jail, and given my attitude, would add another 30 days. She then brought up the purpose of the meeting, questioning why I hadn't made my first 2 child support or maintenance payments to my ex-wife. She also inquired about the absence of my lawyer, questioning if they were out due to my contempt. In frustration, She expressed her mistaken impression that being really smart was a requirement to be a judge and thanked me for correcting her on that. She suggested explaining things to me so I could understand. Sorry if it's still over your head, but the lowest I can go is so a fifth grader can comprehend it. Do try to keep up. I really was becoming concerned about her bench catching on fire from the flames she was snorting at that point. I was starting to think that she actually didn't like me. I am in jail. I have no access to any money. Since I have no access to any money, I am unable to send any money since it was your dumb self that put me there. I suggested she explain why she is the reason the cheating woman can't get the money that she was trying to steal from me to give to that fallen woman. I questioned if she got all that, or if I needed to explain it to her slower. I was then escorted back to my cell for another 90 days 30 from my original sentence, 30% from her first high rate, and another that I managed to catch at the end. To be honest, it really wasn't that bad. Sure, the food sucked, but I still ate it. I had a nice bed to sleep in and lots of free time to relax. I made good use of the weights and exercise machines. I didn't have many problems in there. First off, it didn't take too long for my courtroom antics to become common knowledge inside the jail, making me a few friends. Second, did I mention that Cheryl's family has a few connections that could be of help to someone on the inside? In fact, there was only one problem. It came from one of Wanda's less intelligent cousins. He entertained the idea of getting arrested for a minor offense, spending a week in jail to teach me a lesson. Initially, the entire jail population recognized him before he set foot inside. It didn't take much brain power to discern his intentions. Spotted halfway across the yard, an inmate collided with him while tossing a football. The accidental elbow to his gut occurred, but he continued his quest, foolishly struck by a basketball after another feat. The passer apologized profusely. An accidental elbow to the chin followed while being helped up. After shaking off the incidents, he resumed his trek toward me, encountering 2 more mishaps before reaching his destination. With my back turned, he attempted a sucker punch, but I wasn't clueless. Anticipating it, I spun around, delivering a forceful kick to his groin, a clear 65-yard field goal. His accumulated misfortunes caught up, leading to his transfer to the infirmary. 2 days later, he refused yard exercise, spending most of his time in his cell until released. Back in court, facing the judge, she inquired if I was ready to apologize. I asked, for what? She specified my vile courtroom outburst. I responded, I really don't know what you're talking about. Dismissively, she warned me to keep a civil tongue or she would extend my stay. I expressed frustration, mentioning that another judge might take over and that she was on my last nerve. I sarcastically suggested starting to stomp my feet, perhaps needing an EMT in the courtroom if she had a stroke. I pointed out that there was no child support, maintenance, mortgage, or utilities paid as ordered. I explained that I couldn't pay anything while jailed, couldn't work, and emphasized that the kids were not mine. I added that my ex-wife was a cheat and should pay for her own life, maybe charge for it. Addressing another issue, I stated that I had given her half the business and she should have plenty of money. Wanda's lawyer interjected, explaining that they had been unable to take possession of her client's part of the business. Mr. Nealon had sold his company to an overseas entity about 2 months before filing for divorce, and they hadn't determined the actual owners to address the court order. Suddenly, an attractive woman approached, stating she represented the board of directors for the firm that purchased the business. She moved to dismiss the ruling, giving Mrs. Nealon any part of a business owned by her ex-husband. She argued that it was irregular to award ownership without the business's involvement, as the purchase predated the divorce. This company had no bearing on the case. They rejected any claim of ownership by Mrs. Nealon. Someone queried about the money from the sale. The young woman explained, regarding Wanda, the transfer of ownership and payments were conducted overseas. I'm not privy to that information, but my understanding is that the money from the purchase never entered U.S. territory, making it not subject to U.S. laws. Any claim on that money needs addressing with your ex-husband, possibly in the country where the money is located. Wanda's lawyer asked, what country is that? The original transfer of funds was in Belgium, but my understanding is that the money was transferred somewhere else shortly after the sale. I have no idea where it was transferred to, the young woman replied. My ex lawyer spoke up again, expressing desperation on behalf of my ex. The house was going into foreclosure as the mortgage hadn't been paid in 3 months and the utilities were on the brink of being cut off. It was mentioned that my client's parents had assisted a bit initially, but it was becoming too much for them. Despite finding a job as a waitress at a local diner, the income wasn't sufficient to maintain the house. The judge addressed me, stating that I had 1 week to bring all the payments up to date. I responded sarcastically, suggesting bending over to pull cash out of my crack, which unfortunately didn't exist. I emphasized that I was physically unable to comply, as I was in jail with no access to any money. I couldn't work due to my incarceration and thus couldn't obtain any cash. I pointed out the misconception that I had money laying around in my cell and highlighted the lack of opportunity provided to fulfill the payment orders. I explained that I didn't have a lawyer, emphasizing that I was financially broke. I questioned the existence of the phantom accounts being mentioned, stating that even if they did exist, I lacked access information. I pointed out the need for access to my financial records to obtain account details, highlighting the absence of such records. I challenged anyone to show me the account information for these alleged accounts and questioned the whereabouts of the money from checking accounts, savings accounts, and investments. Regarding the sale of my company, I explained that the company was in bad shape due to previous bad investments, and I had to sell it cheap to cover expenses, leaving no money left over. In response to the court's skepticism, I shrugged and expressed my lack of concern about being believed. I challenged them to show me the account information where I supposedly hid money, suggesting that my ex-wife had stolen the money while involved with her boyfriends. Her lawyer objected, stating that my accusation didn't make sense. I retorted, "It makes as much sense as keeping me in jail where I have no access to money, than demanding that I make all of these payments you all want." The judge asked if I was aware that she could keep me in jail until I paid. I responded by looking at her as if she had just grown a third eye. I played along, stating that it sounded logical to keep me where I was unable to abide by their orders, while making demands that were simply impossible for me to accomplish. 3 months later, the house underwent foreclosure, leading Wanda to lose her Lexus due to payment challenges. Unable to afford an apartment for herself and her daughters, she resorted to living with her parents while working 30 hours a week at the diner. Desperate, they pleaded with the judge to release me for payment initiation. Loverboy, now out of the hospital and engaged in physical therapy, spent hours daily trying unsuccessfully to resolve his financial situation. The silver lining was the prevention of new credit card accounts being opened in his name. Given his severely diminished credit rating, with only minimal insurance coverage on his car and part-time employment at the gym, he couldn't benefit from it and faced high deductibles, making it a lengthy process to pay off his medical bills. Having secured legal representation, I reached a deal with the judge for release from jail to secure employment and initiate payments, surrendering my passport due to suspicions of hidden funds and flight risk. I began working at Taco Bell and lived at the ranch with Howard and Cheryl. Although discreetly observed, I was aware of the surveillance, yet most of the cash was already in my possession. This routine persisted for the next 3 months. Wanda utilized a court order to garnish my minimum wage from Taco Bell, yielding minimal gains for her. During this time, I finalized my plans with Howard, emptied my apartment while I was in jail, and had belongings divided among my extended family. Packages were shipped from them to a common location, undetected by surveillance. Guests discreetly moved packages to their vehicles during visits and barbecues. Over the next couple of weeks, I spent my time either working or at home, avoiding going out. Taco Bell eventually obtained a restraining order against Wanda due to constant annoyance at the restaurant, which became disruptive. Despite the option of termination, a discreet payment to the manager preserved my employment. For legal meetings, my lawyer visited the ranch. Initially representing the new owners of my former company in court, subsequently, I hired her as my lawyer. She possessed a bold nature, akin to a barracuda, especially during poolside encounters, dismissing ethical concerns about a lawyer-client relationship. I asserted that lawyers considered scruples as a form of payment in Russia, with morals being large paintings on walls. Alright, so you're probably wondering about my finances. Yes, indeed, I did sell my firm. No, I didn't sell it to myself. I wasn't going to provide Wanda any chance to stumble upon information she could use to claim any part of the firm. I was divesting from it. Besides, I wanted the cash. The sale happened overseas, and since the money never entered the United States jurisdiction, it wasn't subject to any U.S. laws. The only way Wanda could access it was if I brought any of the money into a U.S. bank, making it vulnerable to her claims due to the judgments against me. That simply wasn't going to happen. It was a significant sum, complemented by my investment accounts in the $10 million range. Cash on hand from the safety deposit box, checking and savings accounts, and safes with cash equaled around. Some of the cash I used for my plans, but I still had about on hand. I wasn't planning to take any cash with me. So it was a lovely Saturday afternoon. We were having another barbecue with the extended family. All the preparations were complete, and everything was set. The party was a blast. I assisted Howard with a grill and smoker. Julia, my lawyer, was there too. Later in the afternoon, one of Cheryl's uncles approached me, expressing gratitude for helping Cheryl and Howard, and was glad that we had finally reconnected. We chatted, and he handed me an envelope. I passed it over to Julia for safekeeping, later in the evening. I made an announcement stating that the lien holder for the ranch had declared that the mortgage for the ranch had been paid off, and Howard and Cheryl now owned the ranch free and clear. This caused a huge celebration. We partied hard that night. It was late when the guests started to leave. Julia couldn't stay the night because she had a flight to catch the next morning. She left with a group of 6 other cars. Interestingly, her flight was out of an airport in the next state. She had packed previously and had everything in her leased car when she came to the party. She never went to her rented apartment. Instead, she went straight to the airport. No one witnessed the man climbing out of the back of her car in the parking garage. And no one took notice of the man casually walking 50 feet behind her as they made their way to the international terminal. Michael Nealon couldn't travel outside the U.S. because he had surrendered his passport to the court. Mitchell Nelson's passport never even garnered a second look. No one even gave a second look as they held hands in adjoining seats, flying first class to Mexico City. Julia Davis suddenly disappeared there. Instead, Jamie Nelson joined Mitchell Nelson for their connecting flight to Ecuador. 2 days later, Greg and Samantha Cooper reached their hacienda on the Caribbean coast of Costa Rica, becoming members of the Mile High Club. Oddly, an old Chevy pickup resembling the one that disappeared from Howard and Cheryl's ranch awaited them. 2 weeks after the barbecue, a bench warrant was issued for Michael Nealon. He was fired 2 days after the barbecue for no show, no call, with no payments to his ex-wife since. When Howard and Cheryl faced the court, a lawyer in a skirt suit argued that the couple had no responsibility towards their cousin who rented a room and disappeared. They even filed a suit against him for back rent. All they could say was that he drove off in his old pickup one afternoon and never returned. No one believed them, but there was no proof to the contrary. Over the next several years, Greg Cooper ran a small charter fishing boat, and Samantha managed their cantina. They were prosperous in the small village, living in one of the larger haciendas with several luxuries. Guests visited occasionally, including Harold and Cheryl and other family members. It was a simple yet delightful life for Greg and Sam, who loved each other fully. Most evenings they entertained guests in the cantina, or their lavish hacienda. Wealthy and pleasant to all, they were quickly accepted into the community. Whenever a need arose, they generously donated. Greg played the stock markets when not on his boat or in the cantina, even setting up accounts for some locals, assisting them with their finances. As for the dishonorable Judge Marie Matthews, I had a good laugh a few years after escaping to Costa Rica. Judge Matthews' wife, that man-hating woman, was caught cheating with a man. The judge had adopted her wife's 3 kids when they married. Since their split, Judge Matthews paid child support, maintenance, and house payments for her ex-wife. To add to the humiliation, her ex-wife swiftly moved her boyfriend in, publicly continuing their affair. Although not officially married, they acted like a typical couple. Rumors circulated about their wedding date set exactly 1 week after their youngest son graduated from college, coinciding with the end of Judge Matthews' financial obligations.
I had known Kelly for a long time. We first met as kids, growing up in the same small town where our families were closely connected through the local farming industry. Her dad owned the grain elevator, and mine ran the largest farm in the area. It seemed inevitable that Kelly and I would end up together, and over time we built a relationship that eventually led to marriage. Despite the occasional ups and downs, I always believed we had something solid. At first, our life together was like any other married couple's, full of happy moments and the usual challenges. But over time, I started noticing a change. Kelly became distant, and I felt the closeness we once shared was slipping away. I had no idea that this distance was just a symptom of something much bigger that I was about to discover. I'm not usually one to visit adult websites, but one hot July evening a few months ago, curiosity got the better of me. I not only browsed the content, but I also ended up paying $100 for a premium membership. What I saw that night was a live stream featuring a gorgeous woman in a steamy scene with a muscular, attractive guy. I'd seen better before, but something about this video stood out. Why? Because the woman, going by the name Jenna, was actually my wife, Kelly. The site, Nature's Pleasure Spa, was aptly named because she was definitely having hot Zexand, enjoying every bit of it. As Kelly rolled over on the bed looking completely satisfied, the guy grinned and said, "Well, darling, that was pretty damn good. Bet your old man never makes you climax like that, huh?" "Hot housewife Jenna?" My Kelly smiled back and said without missing a beat, "Well, Mario, that was good, no doubt. But for the record, no one lights me up like my husband. I've been with a few guys, but no one makes me happy like he does. You're good, but he's amazing, so don't stop trying." She smiled again. Mario looked puzzled and asked, "Well, if he's so amazing, why are you cheating on him by coming here and being with me?" She responded, still smiling. "I didn't plan on this happening, but I love Zex, and I'm glad you take care of me. I also do it because I can get away with it and he'll never know. I truly love my husband with all my heart, and after these 3 nights here, I realize just how much better he is than what I get here. It makes me love and appreciate him even more." She laughed and added, "Actually, I'm probably doing him a favor by coming here and doing this, so come on over and drill me again." Like I said earlier, the $100 was money well spent because it allowed me to see what was going on with my loving wife, and it cost a lot less than hiring a private investigator or buying surveillance equipment. You're probably wondering how I got to this point. What led me to visit that site in the first place? It's a fair question, and the most honest answer I can give is that it was just a fluke, a stroke of luck. Not that my wife was sleeping with Mario, but that I found out she was cheating. Kelly and I have been married for just over 8 years. We first met in elementary school and grew up in a small town in central Illinois. She lived in town and I lived in the country. Her dad owned the largest grain elevator, and my dad owned the biggest farm. Since our parents did business together, it was natural for us to meet and become friends. I won't bore you with childhood crushes, high school romance, or even college. We both dated other people and yes, slept with others. We weren't exclusive. But deep down, I think we always knew we belonged together. Oh, and yes, I was the one who took her pureness, though there were others for both of us along the way. During our junior year at the University of Illinois, we decided to be exclusive. A bit later, I proposed, and about a year and a half later, just a week after graduation, we were married. Life seemed good, at least I thought it was, until that night in July. But anyway, back to the story. 3 years ago, Kelly's parents retired and moved to Phoenix, Arizona. Kelly, along with her sister Amber and brothers Tom and Carl Gentry, bought a 48% stake in the family grain business from their father, Tom Sr. He wanted to keep controlling interest for a few years to back their growth financially. Over time, he planned to reduce his stake until they owned the business outright. Amber is married to my friend Walter Swanson, who also happens to be a grain farmer. His farm is just a bit smaller than mine, and since we live nearby, we spend a lot of time together. Tom and Carl manage the grain business together, while Kelly handles the finances and bookkeeping. Amber also works there, managing customer relations and grain sales. It's a true family-run operation, with a few additional employees, mostly truck drivers and grain handlers. During the busy harvest season, they hire some part-time help as well. That's enough background. Now let me get back to the story of how I discovered my wife cheating online and what unfolded afterward. All 4 of the Gentry siblings put a lot of effort into finalizing the deal to buy out their father's share of the grain business. I wasn't too involved in it, but I knew they had to work hard to make it happen. There were meetings with banks, the Illinois Department of Agriculture, and insurance companies. By the time it was all settled, they were exhausted. Luckily, this all took place during winter, their slowest time of year. As for me, it was after harvest, so I didn't need Kelly's help on the farm as much as I would during the busy season. While she doesn't work on the farm directly, with 2,200 acres of corn and soybeans, planting and harvest times are hectic, and I rely on Kelly to run errands and assist where needed. You get the idea. Since things were slow, Kelly and Amber decided to treat themselves to a few days at a spa to unwind. They booked a 3-night stay at a place called Princess Spas. I know I previously mentioned Nature's Pleasures Spa, but that's the name of the website. Princess Spas is the actual spa. The ladies came back so relaxed and refreshed that they made it a yearly tradition, booking another stay the following July, after planting season was over. It was during that weekend spa visit that I stumbled upon the video. But how did I find it in the first place? Dan Marvel, the field agent for the Illinois Department of Agriculture in our area, stopped by one day during his routine rounds. Kelly and I knew Dan from college. When he asked about her, I mentioned she was on a getaway at Princess Spas. He gave me a strange look and mentioned that something odd was going on there that I might want to check out. He said his cousin used to work there as a masseuse and had shared some wild stories. He also said they had a website with a different name, something with pleasures in it. He didn't give me many details, just advised me to look into it. Well, I'm someone who likes to poke around the internet. I browse different sites, sometimes even stumbling on some spicy content, but usually it's just for fun. That night, curiosity got the better of me, and I did some searching. It didn't take long before I found Nature's Pleasure Spa and its live stream, and that's when everything unraveled. But you already know what happened next. I was devastated. I cried, yelled, got angry, then fell into a deep depression. All the emotions you'd expect when discovering your spouse is cheating. And it wasn't just this one time. I soon realized this wasn't Kelly's first affair. Nature's Pleasure Spa had an archive section, and I found videos from Kelly's previous visits, as well as the ones from the current trip. With the premium membership, I could download each video for an extra $20. I downloaded 2 videos from her first visit, 3 from her second, and 3 from this current trip. 8 videos in total. So, for $260, I had all the evidence I needed to divorce my wife. I didn't have a clear plan yet, but I knew I had to act quickly. I wasn't going to wait a month or even a week to confront her. As far as I was concerned, the sooner we split up, the better. Kelly had slept with at least 2 men, Mario and Steve, 8 times, and I had video proof. I didn't care if there were more, it was already too much. I made several copies of the videos onto DVDs and stored them in a very safe place. When my father built our house, he had a wall safe installed, hidden behind a panel in the office bookcase. Once the copies were secure, I deleted everything related to Nature's Pleasure Spa from my computer, including the original files. Other than the DVDs, there was no longer any digital trail. With that taken care of, I grabbed my phone and sent Kelly a message. Kelly, it's Jack. I know exactly what you're doing at Princess Spa, and I have evidence to prove it. Don't bother coming back to the house. This is no longer your home, and soon I won't be your husband. We're done. My lawyer will be in touch in the next few days to arrange for you to collect your belongings. Apparently, Kelly had turned off her phone and didn't get my message until the next morning, as I didn't hear from her that night. But early the following day, my phone started ringing. I saw it was Kelly calling, so I let it go to voicemail. Soon after, I heard her message. Jack? What are you talking about? Honey, I have no idea what's going on. Why would you send me such terrible messages? Amber and I are packing up now, and I'll be home in a couple of hours. Whatever you're thinking, you're wrong. I'll see you when I get home so we can talk. I love you, Jack. A little while later, she called again, and I ignored it. The voicemail was nearly identical, word for word. I began to wonder if she'd written it down, knowing I wouldn't answer. Soon after, a text came through. Again, almost the same message. Since I wasn't going to talk to her, I sent a short text back to acknowledge her messages, but keep my distance. Maybe Mario knows what I'm talking about, honey. Would you have him call me if I asked? And as I said before, don't come back to the house. You're not welcome here. We're done, Kelly. I didn't get any more texts, but later that afternoon she called again and left another voicemail. Jack, we need to talk. I'm staying with Amber until we clear up this awful misunderstanding. Please call me so we can talk. That was Sunday afternoon, and I didn't return her call. The next morning, I went to my bank and arranged for a second safe deposit box in my name only. I placed one copy of the DVDs in the box, along with the original prenuptial agreement. I had a meeting scheduled with my lawyer at 11 a.m., so I made another copy of the prenup just in case there was any issue. When I arrived at my lawyer's office, I saw Kelly sitting there. She looked up at me, and I could see she was in rough shape. Her hair was a mess, and she had dark circles under her eyes like she hadn't slept. Kelly said, Jack, we need to talk about this. I asked, how did you know I'd be here? She replied, Richard called me when you made the appointment. At that moment, Richard Warner, my attorney, came out and asked us both to come into his office. My anger was boiling over, so I said, No, Richard, we're not going in together. You've lost my trust by calling Kelly. I need to know right now. Are you representing me and only me? Lawyers are supposed to be smart, but Richard missed the memo because he said, No, Jack, if this proceeds, I'll be representing Kelly. Turns out he thought the grain business was a better client than my farm. Maybe it was, since he had the Gentry family as clients too. I had my opinion about that, and I figured he'd realize his mistake eventually. Fine, Richard. I want all my original documents and copies of contracts ready by 4 p.m. today. I'll either pick them up or send a courier. I've appreciated your work in the past, but you're making a big mistake. My new attorney will contact you soon. Kelly stayed silent, but then pleaded, Jack, why won't you talk to me and straighten this out? Because, Kelly, it's clear Richard values you more as a client, and I'm not having this conversation without legal representation. Richard chimed in, Jack, you know I've always been fair with you. You have nothing to worry about. Oh, Richard, I have plenty to worry about. You can't serve two masters, and it's clear where your loyalty lies. And you've already shown I can't trust you by calling Kelly." With that, I said goodbye and left. I could hear Kelly starting to cry as I walked out the door. Now I had to find a new attorney. I knew David Warner, Richard's brother, was a skilled attorney and competitive with Richard. He seemed like a good option, but I wanted to do some research first. Attorneys, accountants, bankers, and insurance agents are people you need to trust completely, and I wanted to be sure. I knew a few people who had worked with David, so I called his office to ask for references. The secretary sent me a list, and 4 friends of mine were on it. I stopped by to see 3 of them, and they all gave glowing reviews of David's work, so it didn't take long for me to make up my mind. I had no doubt David would do a good job for me. I didn't visit the 4th friend on the reference list because it was Wally, and I didn't want to involve him since he's married to Amber, Kelly's sister. I called David's office again, gave my name, and asked if I could schedule an appointment for after 4 p.m. The receptionist said he was busy until 4:30, but would check if he could meet after that. I knew there was a chance he wouldn't be able to, but I had to try. When she came back on the line, she said, "Mr. Warner can see you at 4:30, but it'll have to be brief as he has other evening commitments." I agreed and confirmed I'd be there. "I look forward to seeing you then, Mr. Hagen. By the way, my name is Samantha, and I'm David's wife." At 4 p.m., I stopped by Richard's office to collect my paperwork. They hadn't finished copying it yet. It was obvious they were stalling, hoping I'd changed my mind. I lost my temper and told them I needed every piece of legal paperwork within 15 minutes, or my new attorney would follow up. They asked who my new attorney was, and I told them they'd find out soon enough. After that, the office went into overdrive, with 3 people copying documents at once. 20 minutes later, I had everything. I still had time to make it to David's office for my appointment, so I didn't make a bigger fuss about the slight delay. I met with David, and he agreed to become both my personal and business attorney. I asked if I could leave all the documents I'd retrieved with him for safekeeping, and he agreed to store them in his vault until we could review them together. We scheduled an appointment for the next day, Tuesday at 9 a.m., to go over everything and plan for the divorce. When I left his office around 5:30, I smiled at Samantha and asked, "So, Samantha, am I in trouble or are your evening plans still on?" She smiled and said, "You did just fine, Mr. Hagen. Our evening is still on as planned. I wish all our clients were as punctual as you've been, but please call me Sam from now on." "Thanks, Sam, and you can call me Jack." The next morning, we reviewed all my business paperwork and contracts. I can't share details, attorney-client privilege and all that, but I can say David found everything to be in good order from a business standpoint. We broke for lunch, and David and Sam invited me to join them at the local diner. I agreed and met them there as I needed to stop by my bank first. They were a delightful couple, and we had a pleasant lunch. I learned they'd been married for about 10 years and had 2 daughters, ages 6 and 3. They showed me pictures, and the girls were adorable, looking just like their mom. They had beautiful smiles, just like Sam. That lunch lifted my spirits, making my transition to working with David easier. But it also saddened me because I realized my life partner wasn't with me anymore. Seeing how happy David and Sam were reminded me of how things had been with Kelly before I discovered her cheating. It brought tears to my eyes a few times. David didn't notice, but Sam did, and I could see the concern in her eyes. After lunch, I stopped by the bank and made some changes to protect my assets. I also picked up a $5,000 check payable to David Warner Law Offices as a retainer. David hadn't asked for anything yet, but I knew he'd appreciate the gesture. I returned to the office at 1:30 to continue our meeting. Sam greeted me and mentioned David was on the phone, then led me to the small conference room where we'd been meeting. She asked if I wanted coffee or anything else, and I said I was fine. She sat down next to me and reached out her hand. "David didn't tell me what's going on, Jack, but based on your reactions at lunch, I can guess what this afternoon is about. I see you're wearing a wedding ring, so I'm assuming it's about your wife. If you'd like, I'd be happy to sit in on the meeting this afternoon while we discuss whatever you need to share." I was on the verge of breaking down again, so I just nodded. My anger had subsided for the moment, and the pain was overwhelming. It felt right to have a woman's presence for the sensitivity and comfort they can offer. I realized I might need Sam's support during this difficult time. In the afternoon meeting, I told the full story of how I discovered Kelly's infidelity. I broke down a few times, and Sam was there to comfort me. After regaining my composure, I explained my intentions. Unless something changes my mind, I'm planning to file for divorce and enforce the prenuptial agreement. David and I went over the prenup in detail. The terms were clear. I would retain 100% of my farm assets, real estate, and personal property. Kelly would keep her grain business assets. She'd be entitled to 50% of our financial assets if there was no infidelity, but only $25,000 for each year of marriage if there was. Household personal property would be split 50-50ths, no matter the circumstances. David then said, "Jack, I need you to show me proof of the infidelity." "No, David, I have the proof, but I'm not showing it to anyone unless we're forced to go to court. Then I'll present it to the judge." David insisted, "Jack, I really need to see it to ensure we have a solid case for infidelity." "David, you're going to have to trust me. I have the proof, but I loved Kelly, and I don't want anyone seeing what I've seen unless it's absolutely necessary." Sam gently touched David's arm and gave him a nod, signaling for him to back off. David reluctantly agreed. Over the next few days, Kelly called me several times, leaving messages, but I never answered. I deleted her voicemails without even listening to them. Then, David called to tell me we had a meeting scheduled with Kelly and her lawyer, Richard, for Thursday at 10:30 a.m. When Thursday came, David and I drove to Richard's office. As we arrived, I noticed Kelly's car in the parking lot, so we headed straight inside. Richard's receptionist showed us to a small conference room, and after just a couple of minutes, Richard and Kelly walked in. Kelly looked much better than the last time I had seen her. It was clear she'd made an effort for this meeting. She was undeniably beautiful. I fought hard to keep my emotions hidden, not wanting her to see how much my heart ached. She smiled and said, "Jack, I hope we can finally talk and resolve this misunderstanding. I miss you, and I want to come home." I stayed silent, knowing my voice would betray me if I spoke. I needed to get a grip on my emotions, and it wasn't going to be easy. David started, "We're here to discuss the divorce proceedings for the dissolution of Jack and Kelly's marriage. I believe it's important to give both parties time to express their thoughts on how to move forward." Richard nodded in agreement and added, "My client believes this is a misunderstanding and would like the chance to clear the air with her husband." That was it. My anger flared up, helping me regain control of my emotions. I looked at Kelly and said, "Kelly, here are the facts. When we got married, we signed a prenuptial agreement, and we updated it 2 years ago when you bought into your father's business. I've brought copies of the updated agreement for everyone." Kelly looked surprised and said softly, "But Jack, I don't want a divorce. I want to be your wife. Can't we move past this and be happy again?" I barely acknowledged her words and continued. "The prenup was meant to protect our individual interests while still allowing us to benefit from marriage. Initially, it was to protect the assets that have been in my family for generations. When you bought into your father's business, we updated it to protect your family's assets as well in case of divorce. The agreement clearly states that I retain 100% of my family's assets, and you retain 100% of yours. Debts related to those assets remain with the businesses, and neither party is responsible for the other's debts. Our shared marital assets are separate, and the agreement outlines the specific division of those assets depending on the circumstances of the divorce." I continued, "As stated in this document, you are entitled to your personal belongings, your clothing, jewelry, car, and anything else that I have no interest in. The same applies to me. All non-farm personal property, furniture, electronics, and artwork will be split 50-50ths. Farm-related property, grain bins, machinery, equipment, stays 100% mine since it's part of the farm operation. Financially, in the event of divorce, you are entitled to 50% of our financial assets if there has been no infidelity. There are 2 exceptions to this. If you divorce me for infidelity, I receive only $25,000 per year, or $200,000 total, not 50%. If I divorce you for infidelity, you receive $25,000 per year, or $200,000 total, not 50%. I paused before saying, "Kelly, I'm going to ask you some questions. How you answer will determine whether I move forward with the divorce and on what grounds. That will also determine any financial distribution. If our marriage has any chance of surviving, you need to be completely honest. If you refuse to answer or lie, it's over. Do you understand? Are you willing to do this to try and save our marriage?" Kelly, looking stunned by the details of the prenup, snapped out of it and said, "Yes, Jack. I'll answer your questions honestly. I love you, and I want our marriage to survive. I'll do whatever it takes for you to let me come home." "Kelly, I'd like to record these questions. Are you okay with that?" She hesitated and looked at Richard, who had stayed quiet up until now. Richard, in typical lawyer fashion, said, "Kelly, I'd advise against it, but it's up to you." David added, Kelly, I agree with Richard. I'd advise against recording, but it's Jack you need to convince, not Richard or me. So do what you think is right. Kelly replied, I'll do anything to clear up this misunderstanding. Yes, go ahead and record it. I'm fine with recording whatever Jack and I discuss. David and I had brought a tape recorder, so we set it on the table to ensure everyone's voices were clearly captured. Kelly then asked, Jack, what are your questions? I began, Kelly, I want to ask if you've been faithful to me, but I'm going to break it into 3 time periods. The first is from the day we agreed to be exclusive until the day we got engaged. Were you faithful to me during that time? Kelly smiled and answered confidently, Yes, Jack, I was faithful to you during that period. I stared at her and said, Well, that's your first lie. You couldn't even answer the very first question honestly. I should walk out right now, but I won't. Yet. Are you really telling me you didn't sleep with Larry Evandale just 2 days after we agreed to be exclusive? Is that what you're saying? Larry wasn't the type to keep things to himself. He bragged to me that you invited him over on a Tuesday night when your parents weren't home, and he had sex with you in your bed. Oh, and Kelly, he also told me you didn't use a rubber. He even smirked and said, Bareback's way more fun when you're with a promiscuous. His parting shot as he walked away was, Jack, she loved it. And I'm sure I'll get a repeat performance, probably even after you marry the promiscuous. You might say he made it all up, but Amber overheard him. She came over to me and said, Jack, Kelly loves you. She won't cheat on you again. That was just a one-time thing, a goodbye to him. Don't do anything rash. Oh, and by the way, he lied. He used rubbers. I saw the wrappers in the trash the next morning. So, Kelly, you've already lied to me. I'll let this one slide, but there won't be any more passes. Tell the truth, or face the consequences. Kelly looked devastated. I'm sorry, Jack. I was wrong. I continued. After that, I didn't trust you. I watched you closely for 6 months. In that time, you didn't do anything suspicious, so I asked you to marry me and gave you the ring. I know you were probably hoping I'd ask sooner, but I wasn't ready to trust you, so you had to wait. Now here's question 2. During our engagement, from the time you got the ring until the day we got married, did you cheat on me? She didn't hesitate. No, absolutely not. I replied, I know that's true because I still didn't trust you completely, so I kept an eye on you for that whole year. I was pretty sure you were faithful during that time. Seeing how emotional Kelly was getting, Richard asked for a break to talk with her. She was clearly shaken by the revelation about Larry Evandale. We took a break for lunch, and David and I picked up Sam to go to the local diner. At lunch, Sam asked how things were going, and David said, I think Jack's handling it well. Not much has come out yet, but he's laid the foundation for getting honest answers about the marriage. If she admits everything, he may still want a divorce, but he'll know she's trying to save the marriage. It's a tough call, but I think Jack will make the right decision. Of course, if she lies, he'll have to figure out his next step. Sam gave me a knowing look. Her intuition had clearly picked up on my pain. I gave her a weak smile and said, This is hard. Why do people do such stupid things and cause so much pain for themselves and the ones they love? She reached over, put her hand on mine, and said, If only we knew, Jack. Maybe we could slap some sense into them before they did something so stupid. That made me laugh, and David joined in. Even during a tough time, I found a way to laugh, which says a lot about the resilience of people. We cry at funerals, but can still laugh. I guess people grieve during divorces, but also find humor. I smiled at Sam and said, Thanks, Sam. I needed that. She nodded, and we headed back to Richard's office around 1 p.m. Once back in the meeting, I reminded Kelly, You need to answer honestly. If you lie, this meeting ends, and there's no hope for our marriage. Do you understand? Yes, I understand, Kelly replied, clearly shaken. I will tell you the truth. I asked, From the day we were married until today, have you ever cheated on me? Tears filled her eyes, and I could see how hard this was for her. But I couldn't let her off the hook. I needed her to be honest, to prove she cared enough about our marriage to come clean. I wasn't sure if I could stop the divorce, but if she told the whole truth, I'd know she was trying. Yes, Jack, she said quietly, tears falling. I did cheat on you. She then dropped her head onto her crossed arms on the table and sobbed. I'm so sorry, Jack. Can you ever forgive me? I asked Richard and David to leave the room because I had more questions for Kelly and didn't want to embarrass her in front of them. Both lawyers objected, but I insisted, and Kelly nodded at Richard, signaling that she wanted him to leave too. I already had her confession on tape, which was enough for the divorce proceedings. I didn't want the rest of the conversation recorded, so I turned off the recorder. Kelly, I need you to answer these questions. When, where, who, and why, I asked, doing my best to stay calm. Sniffling, she whispered, "Oh, Jack, I'm so sorry. It happened this weekend at Princess Spa. One of the masseurs, Mario, is the one I cheated with." "Why?" I asked. "I don't know exactly, Jack. It was just the passion of the moment. Amber and I were having such a great day, and after dinner we decided to get massages before bed. Mario was my masseuse. I was lying on my stomach and he started the massage. His hands were soft but strong, and it felt so good. He worked on my arms, shoulders, and back, then moved to my legs and inner thighs, stopping just short of being too close. After that, he started again on my back and shoulders, and I was still tense. I felt him untie my bikini top and pull it down. I have to admit, it felt great, and I didn't stop him." She started crying again. "Jack, if I could go back, I never would have let it happen. We wouldn't be in this situation. You have to believe me." As much as it hurt to hear it, I needed her to tell me everything, not because I was curious, but because I needed to see how honest she'd be. "Go on, Kelly, tell me the rest," I urged. "There's nothing more to tell," she said through her tears. "We had sex." She fell silent, and I waited, hoping she would say more. But she just sat there with her head down, sniffling. Eventually, she looked up at me and asked, "Jack, is there any chance you'll forgive me?" Not wanting this to feel like a court hearing, even though it did, I asked, "Kelly, is this the whole truth? Nothing but the truth?" She gave me a look I hadn't seen before, a mix of uncertainty and fear, as if she was calculating how much I knew. Finally, she said, "Yes, Jack, that's the truth. I'm so sorry." My heart was breaking, but I managed to keep my composure. I got up from the table and called David and Richard back into the room. "This meeting is over," I said coldly. Before leaving, I turned to Kelly and said, "I'm divorcing you on the grounds of infidelity. The terms of the prenuptial agreement will be enforced." She was shocked and cried out, "But why? Jack, I confessed. I'm begging you to forgive me. Please, Jack, I love you. Please forgive me." "You lied to me, Kelly. You didn't care enough about our marriage to tell me everything. If you had been completely honest, maybe I could have considered staying. But you didn't even give us a chance. You thought you could get away with just one confession, but you lied. It's over." I turned to leave, but she screamed, "Wait, Jack! I'll tell you everything. Please don't leave me." I spun around and glared at her, my anger and hurt clear. "You were warned. You had your chance, but you tried to get away with one confession. You lied. It's over." David caught up with me as I was getting into my car. "Jack, are you sure you want to file for divorce on the grounds of infidelity?" he asked. "Yes, I do. She had her chance, and I misjudged her all these years. I wanted her to care enough to tell me everything, but she couldn't even be honest. Go ahead and file." I drove home feeling numb, grabbed a beer from the fridge, and sat at my desk. I drank the first one quickly, then sipped the second, reflecting on everything that had just happened. I had multiple copies of the videos safely stored, but now I didn't think I'd need them since I had her confession. Suddenly it hit me. I had walked out of the office without the tape of Kelly's confession. I immediately called David. "David, did you grab the tape recording of Kelly's confession before you came after me?" "Oh, damn," I heard him say. "No, Jack, I didn't. I was so focused on catching up with you that I forgot the tape." I cursed under my breath. I had been so careful in planning everything, but in my anger and pain, I had made a huge mistake by leaving the tape behind. "David, why don't you call Richard and see if you can pick it up? Though I'm guessing their answer will be something like, 'We thought you had everything when you left, so we erased it.'" "Sorry." I hung up, still feeling sick about the situation. I had enough evidence to file for infidelity, but I hadn't wanted to use the videos unless it was absolutely necessary. After I hung up with David, I grabbed another beer from the fridge. Damn, how could I be so careless? I wasn't drunk, but I wasn't feeling much pain either. As I sat watching the evening news before bed, I thought I heard a vehicle pull into the yard. Slowly, I got up from my chair and went to the back door. I stepped out onto the porch, and it was dark for a few moments before the lights went out. Suddenly, something shot me on the back of the head, and I saw a bright flash of light. Then, everything went completely dark. Beep, beep, beep. That was the first sound I heard. It didn't take long to realize it was coming from right beside me. I opened my eyes and tried to turn slightly to the right to see what it was. But as soon as I moved, an excruciating pain shot through my chest and straight into my head, causing flashes of blue and silver stars. What the hell? I thought. Then I heard a rustling sound nearby, followed by a surge of something into my body, and I was out again. The next time I woke up to the beeping, I opened my eyes and looked around, being careful not to move. I'd learned my lesson from the first time. A nurse was sitting in a chair beside me. "Hi, Jack. I'm Susan, your nurse. Please don't try to move, okay? You're going to be fine, and I'll explain everything to you. But for now, just stay still. Do you understand?" I couldn't speak because something was lodged down my throat, but I nodded slightly to show that I understood. "Jack, I need to tell the doctor you're awake. We'll be back soon." I nodded again. It finally clicked that I must be in a hospital, though I had no memory of how I got there. I figured someone would fill me in eventually, so I closed my eyes and waited. "Mr. Hagen, Jack, I'm Dr. Julius. You've suffered serious injuries from a striking during a robbery at your home. Now that you're awake, I'm confident you'll be okay. We had to restrain you to prevent you from injuring yourself further by moving too much. I'm sure you felt severe pain when you tried to move yesterday, right?" A faint smile crossed my face as I nodded. "Yes, we should have done more to prevent that. I'm sorry you experienced that pain." He turned to the nurse. "Nurse Johnson, I think we can remove the restraints now. But Jack, please don't try to do anything on your own just yet, okay?" I nodded again and gestured to the tube in my throat. "We'll also remove the ventilator now. Nurse Johnson will handle it." Once they removed the restraints and the ventilator, my throat felt like it was on fire, and I couldn't speak at first. They gave me a small sip of water, and eventually I was able to whisper, though my voice was raspy and painful. "Can someone tell me what happened?" I croaked. "Jack, it's 7 a.m. and you've just regained consciousness and come off the ventilator. Your throat will hurt for a few hours, and we want you to rest. Nurse Johnson will stay with you, and once you're more stable, we'll notify the police that you're able to talk. They'll explain everything that happened. Medically speaking, you've sustained serious injuries, including a concussion, 3 broken ribs, and multiple contusions. One of your ribs punctured a lung, causing it to collapse. But the EMTs got to you in time and were able to revive you. After we repaired your lung, we reinflated it. You're very lucky, Jack. Had you not been found when you were, you likely would have died. To put it bluntly, you were stricken severely. You were unconscious for 5 days. You briefly woke up yesterday, but then passed out again until now. We'll keep a close watch on you for the next few days, but you should be able to go home after that." As promised, I spent the rest of the day resting, with Nurse Johnson by my side. Anytime I moved too quickly, sharp pains shot through my body, so I stayed as still as possible. By the afternoon, I was able to sit up with help and even managed to use the bathroom with assistance. As I spent more time with Susan, we talked, and I learned that she had been 3 years behind me in school. Her maiden name was Susan Fisk, and she had married Chad Johnson. They had a 3-year-old daughter named Emily, but Susan had divorced Chad after finding out he was unfaithful. I told her about Kelly, and she was sympathetic. The next morning, 2 detectives, Harold Robbins and Josh Carter, came to see me. Before they started questioning me, I asked them to explain what had happened to me. Detective Robbins started. "It appears to have been a robbery that escalated into an attack. We found a 2x4 on your porch with your hair and blood on it. There were no fingerprints, likely because the person wore gloves. There weren't any signs of forced entry, but that's probably because you stepped onto the porch and left the door open. Inside the house, we found several missing pictures from the walls, an empty strongbox in your desk drawer, and ransacked file cabinets. The bedrooms were also searched, with empty drawers and jewelry boxes in the master bedroom. We're not entirely sure what was taken." Detective Carter continued. "When you're able to return home, we'll need you to go through everything to see what's missing. The doctors said it could be 3 or 4 days before you're discharged. After that, we'll work with you to update our reports." Robbins took over again. "We need to ask you a few questions, Jack. What do you remember about the attack?" I sighed. "Not much, honestly. I had a couple of beers and was watching the evening news when I heard a vehicle pull into the yard. I got up to check it out and stepped onto the porch. I saw a shadowy figure, and then everything went black. I don't remember anything after that until I woke up here yesterday. I wish I could be more helpful." Robbins nodded. "That's okay, Jack. We still need to ask a few more questions to help piece this together. Where was your wife during the incident?" "My wife and I are separated. We're in the process of divorcing, so I have no idea where she was." "Mind if I call you Jack?" Robbins asked. "Of course, that's fine," I replied. "Is the divorce amicable, or is there tension between you two?" I thought for a moment. "You could say it's not going smoothly. She's contesting the grounds I'm filing under." "And what grounds are those?" Robbins asked. "Infidelity. We have a prenuptial agreement, and if the divorce is filed under those terms, her settlement will be much smaller. That's what she's fighting." Robbins exchanged a glance with Carter before asking, "Do you think that could give her a motive to hurt you?" "I don't believe she would do something like that," I answered firmly. "I just don't." Robbins didn't argue, but made a note. "We'll check into it just to cover all bases. Is there anyone else who might want to damage you? Any business conflicts, disputes with neighbors, or issues with family?" I shook my head. "No, nothing that comes to mind." "Okay, Jack. When you're feeling up to it, we'll need to do a full inventory of what's missing. I do have a couple of specific questions. Did you keep any cash in the house, especially in that strongbox? And if so, how much? Also, was there anything else of significant value, like jewelry or artwork?" "Yes," I said. "There was some cash in the strongbox, probably around $8,000. I usually keep about $10,000, but I had spent some recently, so it was a little less. As for jewelry, there were a few pieces worth over $1,000, but I can't think of anything else with significant value." I hesitated before adding, "I didn't mention this earlier, but I have a hidden safe behind the bookcase. I'm pretty sure it wasn't found, and I'd prefer to keep it that way if possible." Robbins raised an eyebrow, but didn't push the issue. "Fair enough. If you think of anything else, let us know. When you're ready to return home, give us a call and we'll help you take stock of everything." Over the next few days, I slowly got better. I had plenty of time to rest, and when I was awake, I talked with Susan. I had a few visitors: Wally, Amber, David, and Sam. Kelly and her family, except for Amber, didn't come, which made sense given the situation, but I would have appreciated it. Richard, Kelly's lawyer and my old friend, did visit, and I was glad to see him. Everyone who stopped by showed concern and wished me well. Amber and Sam left with tears in their eyes, each giving me a kiss on the cheek. Those 4 days were tough. I slept a lot but had nightmares that left me waking up in a panic, sometimes screaming without remembering the dream. Susan was always there to calm me with kind words and a gentle touch. I later found out she stayed at the hospital even when she wasn't working. She said my situation reminded her of her own marriage, and she felt the need to support me. While I appreciated her kindness, my life was too chaotic to consider a deeper relationship, though I said I'd like to stay in touch. When it was time for my discharge, Dr. Julius let me know, and I was relieved to finally go home. Susan helped me pack up and wheeled me out to the lobby where Wally and Amber were waiting. She gave me a big hug, and I could tell she really cared, but I wasn't in a place to think about more than friendship. At home, I was greeted by the mess left behind. Wally and Amber offered to help, but I wanted to go through everything myself first. I promised to call them when I was ready for their help, and they agreed reluctantly. The first thing I did was check the safe behind the bookcase. Everything was still there: cash, certificates, stocks, bonds, and the DVD of Kelly's affair. My laptop and a few Terry Redland prints were gone, but not much else. Some bank and credit card statements had been moved, so I called the banks to warn them my account numbers might have been compromised. Weeks went by, but the robbery investigation moved slowly. Detectives Robbins and Carter kept me updated, but there were no leads since nothing high value had been taken. It was turning into a cold case. They had asked about Kelly, but I insisted she wouldn't have injured me, as she would have received many of the items in the divorce anyway. They seemed to agree and didn't pursue it further. I opened new bank accounts and ordered new checks for safety, though no suspicious activity had been reported. I also bought a new laptop and reorganized my office. Then, one day, while sorting through bills, I saw a statement from Reds Inc., which stood for Remote Electronic Data Storage Solutions. I had video surveillance of my property that was backed up to Reds each night. I hadn't deleted anything from the day of the robbery, so I logged into Reds, found the footage from that day, and downloaded it to my laptop. If the quality was good enough, I planned to give it to the detectives to possibly reopen the investigation and find some answers. As I reviewed the footage, I realized there was nothing useful to give the detectives. I knew then the crime would never be solved. After paying my bills, I started focusing on how to move forward. I reached out to an old college friend who worked at Cargill, one of the biggest grain merchandisers in the U.S., and through him, I arranged a meeting with their acquisition team. It's amazing what connections can do. Within 2 weeks, I had a plan in place with Cargill. I took a brief trip to Las Vegas after handling some business in Phoenix, gambled for a couple of days, then flew home to put my plans into action. I had David arrange a meeting with Gentry Grain where I'd talk to Kelly, her brothers Tom and Carl, and her sister Amber. David mentioned that with our impending divorce, the grain reserves wouldn't meet state requirements without my share. They quickly agreed to meet, likely because they hadn't thought about the impact of losing my stored grain. At the meeting, I greeted everyone and got straight to the point. I told them to listen before commenting and made it clear that resolving the divorce was my priority. I handed Kelly the final draft of the papers and asked her to sign them. Kelly responded, "Jack, I don't want a divorce. Whatever you think I did isn't worth ending everything we had. Can't we work through this? I don't want to do this in front of my family." I told her firmly, "Kelly, this ends today. The sooner you sign, the sooner we can move on." She grew angry and said, "If you're divorcing me, I'll fight the infidelity claim. That's the least you can do for me." I expected this. I placed a DVD on the table with the divorce papers and said, "If you fight me on this, I'll use this as evidence in court. It's a video of all 8 times you cheated on me at the spa." Amber was shocked and furious, exclaiming, "You didn't, Kelly. How could you?" I confirmed it, detailing each incident with Mario and Steve. "So yes, 8 videos. Sign the divorce papers now, or this goes to court. I'm done playing games." Tom and Carl were stunned, while Amber quietly cried as Kelly signed the divorce papers. I took my copies and put them in my briefcase. Kelly looked shocked, with unshed tears, likely realizing I had solid evidence of her infidelity. But I wasn't done yet. "Now, let's discuss the grain issue. With this divorce, you'll lose the value of my stored grain, putting you in violation of your grain license and loan covenants. The bad news? You're in trouble. The good news? I spoke to your father, and he sold me his 52% share of the business since your agreement didn't have a first right of refusal clause. Richard didn't do his best work for you. I didn't even have to show him the proof of your cheating. He believed me and knew the company would struggle without my grain. So now I'm the majority shareholder. You each own 12%, and I've already negotiated a deal to sell my stake to Cargill. You can sell your shares for the same price, and I recommend you do so. Cargill will now evaluate the staff, but I secured each of you a 1-year job guarantee. Make the most of it." The shock turned to anger, and Tom, the eldest, finally spoke up. "What have you done, Jack? You ruined the family business because my sister cheated on you. How did you trick my father into selling?" I replied, "Your father sold his stock to keep you, Carl and Kelly, out of jail. You ask what kind of man I am. Ask yourselves what kind of people you are." I tossed a second DVD onto the table. "This shows you and Carl knocking me that night and stealing from my house. Be glad I chose this path instead of giving this to the police." Kelly finally spoke. "Jack, how could you do this to me?" "Kelly, you've wasted my life. Your father and brothers always treated me like I wasn't good enough. And you've always been deceitful. You cheated on me with Larry Evandale, disrespected our marriage, and worst of all, you almost eliminated me in the attack. Tom and Carl broke my ribs, but it was your kicks that drove a broken rib into my lung. If the paramedics hadn't arrived in time, I would have died. Some best friend, huh?" Kelly fainted, and Amber and Carl rushed to catch her. Once she regained consciousness, I delivered my final words. "Your father sold me his stock to keep you out of jail. He's not proud of his children, except for Amber. I've wasted enough time on you, Kelly. I won't waste any more. Have a nice life." With that, I left. The deals were done, I was free, and Kelly and I divorced. A few months later, the siblings were arrested for attack after the video was sent to the police. Kelly's father was furious and came to confront me, but he had a stroke before I could respond. Karma works in strange ways.
Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles.
I've been married to Kathy for 15 years. We have 3 kids, Evan, Derek, and Lila, and a nice house in a good school district. Our lives are comfortable, 2 newer cars, and my wife has the luxury of working for a nonprofit because we don't really need the extra income. I have a job that interests me. The workload's eased up in the last few years, and my hours are reasonable. I travel occasionally, both for work and pleasure. On the surface, everything's great. Good family, a stable home, the 2-car garage. What else could I possibly want? But then, one evening after work, I came home to find Kathy sitting at the kitchen table looking nervous. "Hey, what's going on? Is everything okay with the kids?" I asked, immediately worried. She looked at me, her face tight with tension. "They're fine, Ryan," she said, her voice soft but steady. but I have some really bad news. I'm leaving you. I'm going to marry Henry Caldwell. I froze. What? Who's Henry Caldwell? What does he have that I don't? Do you love him? She nodded, her eyes sad. I do love him. We've been seeing each other for about a year now. He's the governor's cousin. On the side of the family that inherited most of the fortune, the kids and I are going to move in with him. That name hit me like a ton of bricks. Henry Caldwell? That Caldwell? Are you serious? You've been seeing him for a year and I never knew? What the hell is going on? I was stunned. My whole world had just crumbled. It's true then. The husband is the last to know. Well, I guess I made it easy for you. Me trusting you implicitly. Are the children mine? Of course they are. How could you think that of me? Oh, yes, they are yours. She was nice looking, but not a stunner. And nothing out of the ordinary in bed. Unless she must have worked a lot harder to please him than she ever did with me. But what's the point? The pain was turning to a bitter anger, but I was able to keep control of myself. I guess I've been screwing $1 million hooker. I glared at her, jumped to my feet, and gestured towards the door. Well, get the hell out of my house, and don't let the door hit your butt on the way out. You goddamn cheating woman. Enjoy the good life, until he dumps you for someone younger. I have nothing more to say to you. She tossed an envelope on the table and moved quickly out the door, and I sat and cried. I went upstairs to lie down, and saw that the children's rooms had been emptied out, including the pictures they had hung on the walls. It felt like I was living in a tomb. In the weeks to follow, she and Henry Caldwell refused to let me talk with my kids. It was Lila who snuck out and knocked on my door. We worked out a clandestine meeting arrangement. I got 6 burner phones and gave the kids one of the numbers. Every couple of weeks I gave them a new number, so if anyone checked their phones, my numbers were only called occasionally. We were careful about emails which could only be sent from the library computers or a friend's computer, making sure that I use a fake name to hide from my ex. So, I kept up with their lives, not as often as I would like, while Lila called every other day, and the boys about once or twice a week. In the months that followed, it didn't get better. Words cannot describe the fury, hurt, depression that washed over me, that was drowning me. Kathy had traded up in marriage, so far up that she didn't bother to ask for any of our assets, alimony, or child support. There was no point. I guess, to her credit, she asked for nothing of any commercial value. But what she did take was priceless, my 3 children. We sometimes read stories where a woman is offered $1 million to have sex with some guy. Usually it's women we wonder about, the assumption being that most guys would do it for free. The goofy part of that question is, who would pay $1 million for sex? Especially for sex with an average person? I guess that Caldwell has tens of millions of dollars, so I can see her bailing for that. Who knows, maybe it was love. I can say for sure I wouldn't have run off with a Mrs. Caldwell, but I suppose you don't know until someone offers. And the kids too, hiding contact with me. I guess it's the money too, the promise of a free Ivy League educations, along with the more immediate pleasures of the lifestyle big money can bring. Cars, clothes, skiing in Aspen, summer in France, doesn't compare with surf fishing at the Jersey Shore with Pop, but neither does it excuse my children for not insisting on having a foot in each camp. I thought I brought them up better than that, but then they are kids. The biggest thing was still, what the hell did Caldwell see in her? She really didn't stand out in any crowd I could imagine. She was middling in about everything. She was really good with people, but so are a lot of people. As to our friends, most stayed cordial, but now being single, occasionally I was asked to a party, and I did have a couple of buddies to fish with, but I was really lonely without my best friend, and I felt like damaged goods, which I was. I thought of suing them, but my lawyer told me to forget it, that I really didn't have a chance. And for what? I make good money, $130,000 a year, which is a nice living, but against Caldwell? So, I caved and tried to get on with my life. Like I said, in that wrenched first year I really had a hard time. My home was now just a house. Functionally, I was on the very edge of my children's lives. I wasn't fit to date women either. Really, it was my daughter that got me through that horrible year. I kept it together by immersing myself in work. I mean, what else could I do? I felt sorry for myself, buried in self-pity, rolled in misery like a dog in shit for almost a year. After 6 months of that, I sold the damn house and got an apartment in town, cut way back on overtime, and began to flesh out ideas I had come up with over the years, but were ignored by the elderly guys in management. I realized I was a better businessman than the fools running the company. Ever see clearly the way for the business to grow and prosper, but the management couldn't let go of the old business model they developed years ago, which successfully built the business, but was wrong for today's world and was taking it down? It was like I was sailing on the Titanic with me, the only one who could see the iceberg. What could you do besides dress warmly and stand near the lifeboats, reading the launch instructions? My job search was producing nothing until out of the blue, I got a job interview from a company that bought one of our smaller competitors. They wanted me to implement my employer's old business model so they could grow their company. In a series of interviews, I pointed out the problems with that and outlined my own ideas. They were actually willing to pay a premium to lure me away from Titanic Incorporated and more besides because their business was in Chestertown, Maryland. I was able to negotiate a big vacation package by agreeing to take most of it 1 day a week and a contract tied to business growth and profits. Apparently, they had had trouble getting people to relocate to a backwater. Charming or not, Chestertown is as chaotic in the summer as it is dead in the winter. I jumped at the chance to make a clean break of it, changed my email address, got a new phone number. Of course my children knew, but not their mother. Of course, in this age of the internet, if you live your life, you cannot really disappear. But I thought of it as a way to reinvent myself as neither my former employer nor my former wife valued me, and it helped to put them in the fuzzy light of the past. Now I didn't get big-time rich like Caldwell, but I did real well by my standards, and as the business took off, I was able to hire talented young people to implement the business plan. After a few years, I found myself with a nice equity position and began working from home a lot and let others do the day-to-day stuff. I rented a place for a while until I found a big 3-bedroom craftsman-style bungalow on a lot with a view, but within walking distance of Chesterton. The big demand here is for old historic homes, but houses from the 1920, 1930 are modern houses and pretty reasonably priced. As a bonus, it had $20,000 of woodworking tools and a heated garage that the old guy bought new when he retired, but never got around to learning how to use. I joined the local historical society, volunteered for this and that, put myself out there, as they say, but unfortunately, the selection of suitable mates was thin. I was 45 years old, relatively few single women in the 35 to 40 age group, and of the few of a suitable age. Well, I'll get shot for saying this, but the education level of the year-round residents was mixed, and the summer people were generally too high-end for my taste. One of the members of the Historical Society asked me if I could fix an electrical problem on his boat. I liked the old guy, so he and I spent Saturday on the boat, and I fixed a plethora of assorted problems. We took it out for a short cruise, and I found I liked sailing, and he liked company, so he taught me sailing. We worked out a trade. I'd keep all the mechanical/electrical stuff running. He'd pay someone to the endless cosmetic restoration and cleaning, and I could take it out more or less at will. I just had to call in advance. If it was a day sail, often as not we would go out together. I should tell you that I could have bought the damn boat, but I'm cheap, and who wants the expense of owning and maintaining a boat? I was at the marina changing the oil in the auxiliary engine, and heard hoots and shrieks as a boat was ineptly wallowing up to the dock. I grabbed a boat hook and trotted over. Seeing the run of the tide, I called for the stern rope. They threw it short, but I could just hook it and pulled the stern to the dock, whereupon the tide pushed the bow in so I could catch that rope which was dragging in the water and tied them fast. The idiot at the wheel was drunkenly insisting I join their party for dinner at one of the expense account restaurants nearby. I had no interest in spending the evening with a bunch of honking drunks and politely demurred when a really good-looking woman came up beside Captain Rum. "Don't be put off by Wallace. I would like you to come to dinner with us. After all, you rescued us. So much you can infer from a sentience." She was sober, no rings on her left hand, nice-looking, educated, faint British accent, with a body built for comfort. "Now would you be sitting alongside me at dinner?" Hoots of teasing laughter from the boat. "He hooked the boat, and you hooked him. Way to go, Heather." We were smitten with each other. Heather was 7 years younger than me, worked in a law office in Washington, D.C., writing laws and regulations for lobbyists. She was a gorgeous thing, not Hollywood gorgeous, but somebody I certainly would pick out of a crowd. As we talked, I found she shared my politics, love of old things, the water, and reading. She couldn't have children, which bothered her years ago when she got the news, but over the years became reconciled with it. Me, after the experience I had with mine, that didn't bother me at all. "Heather, I don't want this night to end. No strings here. Would you stay at my house? I've a guest bedroom with a locking door. Not that you need to. Got your driver's license with you? Give it to me." I handed it over. She took a picture of it with her phone, emailed it. "There, if I don't come back in one piece, my mother will come after you. Can you drive me to Waldorf Sunday night?" "Sure. Where's Waldorf?" No cabs around the restaurant, but I waved to a couple of older women I knew fairly well who were just leaving, and I asked them if they could drop us off at the marina where my car was. One of them had set me up with 2 blind dates and was delighted to see I was sweet on Heather. After the introductions to Grace and Eulalia, who prefers to be called Lily, they teased Heather. Lily started in, Ryan is a real asset to the town. I try to fix him up with a local girl or two, but my mistake was not being able to find anybody who looks as lovely as you. We want to keep him here, so when you marry him, you have to agree to live here. Grace chimed in. He can cook, fix anything, and has a good income. Plus, he's nice to sweet old ladies. Heather gave it right back. Well, if he's been rejected by all of the young women around here, maybe I should be careful. They must know something I don't. Lily. Or more likely you recognize what you've got there. Bathes regularly, but a very disheveled dresser. He does need taking care of. Ladies, please, I just met Heather this afternoon. You'll scare her away. We didn't have sex that weekend, but the next weekend, we took the boat out, and we drilled like rabbits as both of us were ending a long dry spell. Physically, she was the opposite of my ex-wife. The ex was short, skinny, and blonde. Heather was almost as tall as me, nicely rounded body and jet black-haired. She was English, her father from Avery, England, and her mother from Madras, India. Best of all, we laughed at each other's jokes. Unfortunately, she was also the polar opposite of my ex-wife in not so good ways. Kathy was willing to try anything you ever read about or saw in a corn film, and willing to do it a lot. Heather liked sex, but she was pretty uptight. I was puzzled because she talked a good game, but was really limited in bed, and it wasn't getting any better. I had no trouble getting her to pleasure, but she thought BJ dirty talk, outdoor sex, and just about everything else was perverted or disrespectful to her personally. I was about to reluctantly toss her back into the dating pool, when I got an inspiration one cold wet day in the fall. We walking into Chesterton one Saturday, and I realized that she was the only woman in the town still wearing sandals. I wondered if she had a foot fetish. I got 2 drinks in her that evening at the restaurant, and a glass of wine at the house, so she was pretty laid back. Heather, some people feel that sex can be gross or humiliating, and that loving people should be dignified when in bed together. I think my job is to do for you whatever you enjoy, and that your job is to do for me whatever I enjoy. Ryan, don't you like making love with me? What are you talking about? What we do, you and I, is love-making. You're good at that. But there's also lusty drilling and sex play, and we haven't done anything like that. Tonight, I'd like to do that. Well, we did just that. This year the weather was remarkable mild. Well into October, and our romance was perhaps the happiest time for me in decades. Once a week, weather permitting, we'd sail on Chesapeake Bay. Often it was warm enough to shed our clothes for a while, with nary another boat in sight, and have a beer, swim, and generally screw hard once or twice, and snuggling under a blanket as the boat rocked us to sleep, and then to make love in the cool dawn. That fall we fell in love. Our town is 150 years away from D.C. in lifestyle, but only an hour and a half by car. That winter, she sold her Waldorf condo and rented a pied-a-terre in D.C., moving in with me in Chesterton. She has a somewhat flexible schedule, and most weeks spent a couple of nights in D.C. and the rest with me. I proofread her stuff not so much for spelling and grammar, but for clarity and completeness. I would be bullshitting to say that I truly understood everything she wrote, but in the moment I could follow it, and if I couldn't, there was a problem with it. She was a bit more social than me, but I like people too, and we both enjoyed going out with her friends in town. Mine near home, and life was good. She had to head into D.C. one Sunday morning to prep for a case, and as luck would have it, the town council meeting I was attending wrapped up earlier than expected on Monday. So, I decided to surprise her by driving to her apartment. I got there around 9:30, but there was no sign of her. I called, but it went straight to voicemail. Given the mess I'd just come out of with Andrea, my ex, I'll admit it made me uneasy. She called back about an hour later. "Sorry, just taking a quick break," she said. "I'll be working half the night." "What's up?" We chatted for a bit, and I was trying to figure out how to ask her where she was. Before I could, she volunteered the info. "Well, it's turning into a hell of a week," she said with a sigh. "We found out Sunday that our Chicago office didn't do a damn thing on the federal truck standards. So this morning, the whole team packed up and came to the Westin in Fairfax to get it all wrapped up by 2 p.m. tomorrow. I'll be lucky if I sleep at all tonight. The only good news is I'll be back in Chesterton a day earlier than planned." Her voice had that familiar mix of exhaustion and determination, and for a moment, I forgot about everything else. She was so damn driven, always on the move. "Oh good. Actually, the council meeting ended early, so I thought I'd surprise you. I'm at the apartment." "Oh, you poor thing. Spend the night. I should be back about noon or 1. We can have lunch. I'd normally take you up on that, but I need to get back in the morning, and you'll be exhausted. Honey, I'm so sorry I missed you. At least I'll catch your scent when I slide between the sheets. I'll be missing you. I'll take a long nap at the apartment tomorrow and be home in time for a late supper. I love you." A week later, she said. I realized I have to shut my phone off a lot when I'm in meetings, or just so I can concentrate, but then I don't know who is calling, so I got a smartphone for just you and me. We can set it up so you can track me, that way you'll know where I am. I don't need to know that. I trust you. She laughed, and I trust you as well, but I have no secrets from you, and you never know. That phone feature may come in handy sometime for some other reason. So she gave me the gift of knowledge, which wasn't so good for Adam and Eve, but for me, I checked where she was a few times and never bothered again. We had had the biblical 7 years of good luck, and I wondered if it was coming to an end when I opened my door one Saturday morning to be greeted by my ex-wife. I wrinkled my nose and said, "You're dead to me," as I shut the door. Of course Heather heard what happened. Who was that? My ex-wife. I told her to F off, but now she's was knocking again. On how nice, invite her in. I told her she was dead and shut the door on her. Heather glared at me. It's my house too, and you'll be nice to her if only because she's a guest in our house. Things are obviously going very poorly for her, or she wouldn't be here. Heather smiled as she opened the door. My husband tells me you're Kathy. How nice to finally meet you. I'm Heather, by the way. I looked at her more carefully and shivered a little. Kathy was always thin, but now she looked gaunt with sunken eyes and cheeks. My first thought was, what the hell did I ever see in her? And the second had me wondering if she was seriously ill. Kathy looked at me warily and said, "I'm sorry to intrude. I won't be long." Heather slid right in with, "Don't worry about that. We're staying at home this afternoon. We were thinking of going out, but Ryan has some yard work to get done. I'm putting water on. I do so want to talk with you. Did you have a pleasant drive down?" I took the hint and went outside. Call me when the coffees dripped and left them to themselves. It must have been 20 minutes later Heather called. "Coffee's ready." I had put the last quart of oil in the mower and went in the house to clean my hands and pour a coffee. I sat with them as they finished their chatter. Peace came over me. I realized thankfully that I had no feelings for Kathy at all. No love, no hate, zero emotions of any consequence, and looking at the two of them, I could honestly say I was well rid of her. The coffee mugs were finally empty. So after all these years, Kathy, I don't suppose this is a social call. No, it isn't. You have 2 daughters. The youngest is 7 years old and needs a kidney transplant. Jesus, what a bombshell. No. Of course I knew she and Caldwell had daughter, but mine? Can't be. You don't say. That's too bad, but as you know I've never met this child. So why don't you go to Switzerland or wherever money can buy everything and fix her? That's got nothing to do with me. So for the second time, why are you here? My husband's shooting blanks and, handing me an envelope, I knew you would be doubtful. So I got the DNA reports. I didn't have a sample of your DNA, but all of your children have the same father. She's your flesh and blood. We're having trouble finding a kidney match, and she in total kidney failure. Ryan, she won't live all that long, and the doctors think you're likely a match. I'm not, or I wouldn't be here. I'm here to ask you to be checked for a match, and if so to save her life by donating a kidney. I'll pay you anything you ask. Heather saw me starting to go orbital and put her hand on my arm, squeezed hard, and jumped in. We need to discuss this. Why don't you email us the detailed information and we'll discuss it and get back to you. Every day she's suffering. Kathy, let me talk to Ryan. I'll call you the day after tomorrow. I promise. Heather stood up and rummaged in the desk for one of my business cards. As Kathy was leaving, I couldn't help saying sarcastically, "It was nice to hear how the number of my ex-children is multiplying. Do let me know if any more pop out. Drive carefully on your way back to where you came from." I shut the door while Heather walked Kathy to the car talking earnestly. I reheated a cup of coffee thinking the nerve of the witch to rub her money in my face, and went out to my shop. Heather called me couple hours later for supper. Well, there's what I'd call a troubled woman. Her child is dying, facing a slow death, and the only best hope is a big-time favor from a guy who hates her. And that weren't enough. Her marriage is shaky. That about sum it up? I don't hate her, I just despise her, and I don't despise her for dumping me, but rather for depriving me of my children, and depriving my children of me. She thinks she has it rough facing the loss of a kid. Okay, my kids aren't dead, but they might as well be because they aren't really a part of my life. You think the kid's really mine? I doubt she'd lie about that. I imagine you'll find out pretty quickly if they check you for a kidney match. Shit, I gotta read up on that. I really don't know nothing about kidney disease, transplants, or anything like that. You make her any promises? Just what you heard me say about calling her Tuesday. The child is stable, but not good. And Ryan, I'll support you, whatever comes. I got looking up on Wikipedia, the National Kidney Foundation website, and whatever and found that the kid eventually dies without a new kidney. There is a huge shortage of kidneys. The best outcome is if the donor is a close match to the recipient. The kid would probably get a transplant at some point, but it would be a miserable time for her until she got one, and she might still die of kidney failure. Sunday night, I poured Heather a glass of the good wine we save for company, not the usual plunk we have on the table. You realize I would love to kick that woman to the curb and throw her under a bus. She hasn't changed a bit. Had she not absolutely needed me, she never would have told me about my daughter. But I have to do this. You know that, don't you? This what? Throw her under the bus or donate a kidney. We both laughed. It broke the tension. Love, I wish the kid was okay. I wish your children were part of our lives, and I wish you got to keep both kidneys. But if I had a child, I know I'd do anything I needed to do to save her, and I know you feel the same way. So I understand why you need to give her your kidney. I saw that strength, that courage and loyalty in you before I married you. I was thinking, so, she handed us a way out, didn't she? A free pass, I said, my voice low with frustration. But what do I want out of all this? Right now, it feels like all the pain and fallout is landing on me, and my daughter too. How do I get the ex and her husband to take some of the heat, to put something into this mess? I don't know why you'd care about that, she replied, shaking her head. Forget about them for now. Focus on what you want. Do you even know what that is? I paused, thinking about it for a moment. No, I guess I never really thought about it. Do you know what you want? She gave a soft chuckle, patted my arm, and smiled. That's a question only you can answer. I leaned back, looking out the window, lost in thought. I was thinking, when the boys were growing up, I was so caught up in working, bringing home the money, fixing up the house, the cars, that I never really got to enjoy them. And then they were gone. So now, I've got this daughter I don't even know. I want to be a part of her life. I want to be there for her, to have my picture taken with her on prom night. They still do proms, right? Heather nodded in agreement, though she seemed unsure where I was going with it. I want to raise her like I should have raised my older kids. That's what I want. There was a long silence before she spoke again, her tone serious. Jesus, Ryan, you're thinking about custody, aren't you? She'll never give you that. And honestly, it'd be traumatic for Maria too. I mean, I'd love to have my own daughter on weekends, but it's a lot to ask of anyone. I sighed deeply, knowing the road ahead would be far from easy. But for the first time in a while, I felt clear about what I wanted. I think she might give us custody. Remember the judgment of Solomon? 2 women claim a child. Solomon decided to cut the kid in half, 1/2 for each claimant. One woman agreed, the other renounced her claim, rather than the child die. Solomon declared her the mother. Kathy will do the same, but I want her to have to work for it. Ryan, you don't believe that. You can't make custody a condition of donating a kidney. A kidney for the kid for a kidney. What are you thinking? Lot of thoughts running around in my mind right now. You're right, I can't require custody as a quid pro quo. The kid gets my kidney, but I was thinking Kathy doesn't have to know that. I had worked hard to push the rage out of my heart years ago, and did a good job of it too, but seeing Kathy and the secret child, it came flooding back. I wanted revenge on Kathy too, but I didn't tell Heather that. That night we worked out the framework of a deal, and one of the lawyers Heather worked with offered to work it up into something nice, legal, and enforceable. Just before we went up to Greenville, I added a page at the end. Took me almost 20 minutes to find the same font the goddamn lawyers used. I wanted everything to match. Monday, she called Miriam and set up a family meeting between us, Miriam, her husband Henry, and my 3 older children. We stipulated that Maria not be present, which was only common sense. I went up the day before for a tissue match, which proved she was my daughter, and that I was an excellent match for a kidney donation. While I was doing all that, Heather spent the better part of the day visiting with Kathy and the children, and they got along quite well. The next day, Heather and I sat down with the Caldwells. Henry was clearly annoyed at the whole thing. Kathy was sick with worry, and my other kids weren't much better. They did look good, wearing quality clothing, expensive haircuts, perfect teeth. Well, I read up on all this, and the Kidney Foundation is a really good charity. I'd like to see them come out ahead on this. So it turns out that you were correct, Kathy. Maria is my daughter, and the good news is that I'm a good match to donate a kidney for her. But what you are asking me to do is to undergo major surgery, pop out one of my kidneys, and give it to a stranger. But she's your child, said my ex-wife. No, she's the child of Henry and Kathy Caldwell. I waved towards them. You all left my life abruptly and for good, and none of you ever told me about Maria until you absolutely had to. I have every reason to expect you'll cloister Maria away from me as well, just as soon as you get your pound of flesh out of me. Plus, this is all on me. Not one of you will have shed a drop of blood, not a minute of pain. I mean, you folks don't have any skin in the game, do you? Sorry, but the continuation of my genes isn't that big a deal in my life. Kathy's face was contorted in anguish. There has to be a way. We'll do anything to save her. Anything you want. I paused a bit for dramatic effect. What will it take, you ask? Well, two things. For one, I want some time with my daughter. 72 days a year. 20% her time she'll live with Heather and I. Kathy, would you think that's fair? What's that? 2 weekends a month? Well, that'd be 48 days, so add a week or two in the summer, that's about 15% of the time. So, okay, I would get her 15% of the time and you 85% of the time. Okay, so you agree that would be fair. She looked at her husband, who shrugged and said, more than fair. I think so too. We agree on that. Now consider what I will be going through. Perfectly healthy, getting cut open and an organ removed to help someone else live. How many of you, in my place, would be willing to do what you are asking me to do? Raise your hand. The three women's hands shot up, my two sons a few seconds later, and hesitantly Henry's hand. So you'd all be willing to do what you want me to do? They looked at each other, nodding. Then we have the makings of a deal that will help the Kidney Foundation too. On one day, Kathy and I will donate kidneys, one to Maria and one to the transplant program, and when I come out of surgery, Henry goes in to donate a kidney to the foundation as well. When that happens, Maria gets my kidney, I get custody of Maria. What do we say? 15% of the time. That seems fair to us all. How's that sound? You two will be written up in the paper as heroes. Henry saw a distinction. You'll take credit for it all. What's credit to me? You can say it was your idea. You're all the more noble because your donation is going to strangers, not to kin. Everybody nodded. They were good with it, but Henry didn't look all that happy. I gave him a verbal poke. You okay with this, Jim? He quickly put on his public happy face mask. Sure, it's a good thing to do, and it helps lots of people. So why not? Kathy? They all smiled and nodded. Kathy gushed. Thank you, thank you, thank you, Ryan. You don't know what this means to me. You're wrong about that, Kathy. I do know what this means to you. In fact, more than you realize. But we all agree that Kathy, Henry, and I will donate a kidney. Nodding all around. Okay, so here's the contract for you all to sign. There is a penalty clause on the next to last page, which is my second condition, and Kathy and Henry have to initial it and date it. Henry got serious in a hurry. What the hell's this about a contract? We're all family here, that's not called for, and I for one won't sign. My replacement was grating on my nerves, the pompous prick. We're all a family here, Jimmy, only like the interlocking Olympic rings. Different families, my wife and are a family, and you, Kathy, and the children are a family, and the children, Kathy and myself, are a biological family, so the family bit is sort of muddled. The nice thing about contracts is everybody knows what they are agreeing to in advance. And the penalty clause. If for any reason either of you cannot or will not donate a kidney, Heather and I get custody of Maria. She takes my last name. And the custody figures, which we all agreed were fair, are reversed. We get her 85% of the time. You get her 15% of the time. Of course, we'll ease into this. But if one of your reneges, she'll be registered in the spring for school in Chesterton. Pandemonium. I had to raise my voice. People, people, people. If you all go through with the deal, you get what you all agreed was exactly what you all felt was fair. Only if one of you welches, do I get custody of just one. Just one, mind you. Just one of my 4 children. Let's not be greedy here. Kathy spoke up. We'll take it. Maria lives. That is the big thing here. It's what we all want. It's win-win. She grabbed a pen and signed. Henry balked. So, Jeff, what happens if you don't go through with it? Kathy and I donate kidneys. You do nothing and Maria dies. I smiled. Good thinking, Jimmy. Of course, I come out of surgery before you go in, but there might be a problem of some sort. Here's a letter from the Kidney Foundation that in return for 2 kidneys donated to the foundation, they will put Maria at the head of the list. But you have my word I will go through with it. What more assurance can I give but my word? Kathy was melting down. Sign it, Henry. For our daughter's sake. Henry was hesitant. I'm not sure she's... Kathy jumped on him. Shut up. There's no good way to finish that thought. Sign the goddamn thing. A week later, Kathy went under the knife. And as soon as the surgeon took a piss and changed his scrubs, they cut into me. After I came out of the anesthetic in the ICU, they moved me to a private hospital room. Heather had been with me in the ICU, but as soon as I was settled in the private room, she and Lila came in talking with each other. I got an update on Kathy, and Heather telling me the doctor said I was fine. Lila looked me in the eye and told me she regretted how Henry and Kathy had tried to demonize me. Dad, It was like some kind of almost cult thinking, like a sacrifice we needed to make for the future. I mean, it's stupid on the face of it now, but we were kids and Henry and Mom, they were all on a different planet. She started crying. I'd hold you in my arms and hug you, but I'm not up to it at the moment. Heather was right there. I can hug you, Lila. I forgive you and your dad as well. Come on. You were a kid then, and you did what you could. But in the future, Ryan and I want you to be an integral part of our life. My son Evan came in the door at that point. Good, you're awake. I'm going to donate a kidney too. I signed up for it while you were under. Henry bailed. By the way, he's postponed it into the indefinite future, but it'll never happen. Gee, Evan, I don't know, is that such a good idea? You've got your whole life ahead of you. I don't know. You don't have to, you know. The deal is done. Your kidney doesn't let him off of the hook. That had nothing to do with it. Maria gets to live with you guys. That's all to the good. I think Maria will be better off. I just gave my word. I said I'd do it. I mean, if my mother and my father could do it, and it is a good thing to do, you know? I've been watching Maria suffer, and as I understand it, they may be able to split my kidney and help 2 people. You had Jimmy figured out, didn't you, Dad? You knew he wouldn't go through with it, and he absolutely hates to be called Jimmy. We'd get grounded for 2 weeks calling him that. Heather was looking at me as it dawned on her how I engineered this thing. I figured he wouldn't give anybody a pound of flesh, but I didn't want to admit it. But better yet, he would be the goat for Kathy losing her daughter. I really don't know Jimbo at all, never laid eyes on him until a week ago. He does seem like a bit of a stuffed shirt. He's not one of us, is he, Dad? You tell me. He may be nothing to me, but I rather think he loves you too. That week began the rest of my life. At first, when we had Maria for the weekends, one of her brothers or her sister would bring her down, and often enough the 2 of them would stay the day, returning in late evening, and the wife or I would take her home Sunday. Pretty soon we had them, Maria and whoever drove her down for the whole weekend. When that all went well, we went a Thursday night to Sunday night. Often enough I had my friend's boat, so we sailed and fished and swam all summer. We took Maria and her sister on vacation seeing the sights of Washington, D.C., and then took the boys on the same tour. We extended the trips an extra day because we couldn't get the kids out of the Smithsonian. At the end of summer, Kathy came down with Maria. The 2 of us chatted. She was more relaxed and happier than I could ever remember. Heather gave us some time together. Ryan, you know Henry and I aren't getting along well, don't you? No, actually I didn't. Heather and I are going great though. Maybe you ought to chat with her. You guys must have done something right in years past. The kids turned out well. Henry hasn't really done much in the parenting department, you know? He was more of an older playmate than a father. Yeah, well, I guess it put a lot on you and the help. From the little I've seen of him, he's not one for sacrifice and hard work. Well, with enough money, you can sit around and fritter your time away, I guess. Did you intend to drive a wedge between us? Kathy, when you bailed on me, you didn't give 2 shits about me. And now I really didn't give a thought to you. First of all, like you, I wanted Maria to live a normal life, and secondly, I wanted my children back in my life. I am willing to share, but I resented greatly that you yourself would not. More than the divorce, I resented that. Well, that's all water under the bridge. I'm good with it now. So, what's your problem with him? By him reneging, I lost Maria, my baby, and now he's cheating on me too. I damn near choked, which morphed into a chuckle and the look on her face. I started hearty laughter. You worthless woman. You were happy enough when you were cheating on your husband and denying him his children, weren't you? You really expect sympathy from me? Turnabout is fair play. Well, believe me, I really do know how you feel, and agree no one should have to give up a child. Better line up a good divorce lawyer. You'll still be rich, or is there a prenup? She started to laugh too. Ryan, you can get me laughing. Yes, turnabout is justice, but justice doesn't feel good for my end. There is a prenup, but yes, I'll be rich. But not happy. That last bit is on you. Somewhere along the line you missed an essential fact of life. You have to find out what makes you happy, and then find someone who will enable you to do whatever it is that makes you happy. Only you can figure it out and make it happen. So what if Henry is not the man? Cut your losses and develop an exit strategy. Do what you did last time. Start looking, and when you find someone to be with you, someone to help you through the divorce, at least, dump your second husband and marry your third. You're well preserved. Skinny is still in fashion. You've got money. You play golf, tennis, and probably still great in bed. What are you lacking? Seriously, give Heather a call. Whatever she did when her husband left her worked for her. She can at least commensurate with you more than I can. I started laughing again. I couldn't help myself. Kathy left in late afternoon. Later, Heather, Maria and I walked into town for supper and back home. That night in bed, I told Heather about our conversation. So, you told her Henry was just doing to her what she did to you? That wasn't nice, and she stifled a laugh. You think she was making a run at you? That's an old-time phrase, isn't it? Make a run at you. Don't be silly. She sees how happy I am, how much you and I love each other. Besides, I told her to talk with you, that whatever you did after your divorce worked out fine for you. She can rot in hell for all I care. I went on to tell her how much I love you. Heather and I had as grand a time that night as one could have and not wake Maria. Kathy eventually moved to Florida and invited all of us down for Thanksgiving one year. She had the dinner catered, and honestly, it was awful. Nothing like the home-cooked meals we used to have. After that, the kids started alternating between spending Christmas with her and New Year's with us. We also made it a point to all get together for a big 4th of July picnic in Chestertown. The kids kept in touch with Henry, and to be fair, he took care of them financially. As for me, I only saw Henry twice after that. Once at Lila's wedding, and again at Evan's. When Derek married Ella, we held the ceremony in Chestertown, but Henry didn't even respond to the invitation. To his credit, though, he did send them a check a couple of weeks later. Kathy, on the other hand, well, she spent a fortune on plastic surgery over the years, trying to hold onto her looks. But no amount of surgery can change what's inside, and over time, she grew bitter and envious. Eventually, the kids decided it would be easier if she visited each of them for the holidays, rather than all of them visiting her. That way, each one took their turn with her, but none of them had to deal with her too often. They tell me she's had a string of lovers over the years, but none of them stuck around for long. It hasn't been a happy life for her. As for me and mine, we're good. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.